Chapter 204. If we were to say that we still had a sliver of hope after Zhang Kanwen lost his ability to fight yesterday, then after seeing Lei Yang's glory of knowledge later stage master, everyone was in despair. According to the name list provided, the Guangdong branch's representative today was the Zhuhai branch's president, Xie Qinghua. Like President Su, Xie Qinghua was a middle-aged man in his 40s. Similarly, his cultivation was only at the early stage of glory of knowledge. After Lei Yang took out a glass bottle and summoned a few spirits, Xie Qinghua was still standing next to us. He hesitated, as though he didn't dare to go up. In the glory of knowledge realm, the difference of 1 star was already a huge difference in power, not to mention the difference between the early and late stages. Facing such a losing battle, as long as one was human, it would be hard to avoid hesitation. One couldn't blame Xie Qinghua for being timid. In the end, Chen Shuhe sighed and said in a low voice, "Qinghua, you should go up. Don't feel the burden of winning or losing. Try to ensure that you don't get hurt. No matter what, you still need to save your face. Running away before the battle is really inexcusable." Chen Shuhe made it sound simple, but from the past 2 days of the competition, we could see that this group of Nanyang people weren't easy to deal with. Facing such a huge difference in power, it wasn't easy to ensure that one wouldn't get hurt. Xie Qinghua's face was ashen. He stood there in silence for a long time. In the end, he sighed and waved his long robe before walking towards the center of the venue. Everyone in the Guangdong branch looked at him in silence. They all had the same feeling that the wind was bleak and the water was cold. After Xie Qinghua walked up, the tame headmaster named Lei Yang took out a glass bottle the size of a water cup. He shook it in the air a few times and chanted a few incantations. Soon, a gust of chilly wind blew in the center of the venue, and a dozen black shadows appeared in front of him. Rumor had it that black head magic was a combination of Miaojiang's witchcraft in Southeast Asia. It had a huge influence in Southeast Asia. In recent years, it had even spread to the inland coastal areas. In terms of types, there were 3 types of black head magic: medicine magic, flying magic, and ghost magic. Judging from Lei Yang's technique, it was very easy to tell that he practiced the ghost-subduing technique. On the surface, the ghost-subduing technique of tame head sorcery didn't seem to be much different from the ghost-raising sect's sorcery, but in reality, there was a huge difference between the two. The little ghost raised by the feng shui master of the ghost-raising sect, for them, is probably equivalent to the magic weapon of the people of the Xianmen of the Central Plains. For the feng shui masters of Xianmen, the most powerful among the celestial devices was naturally their own natal celestial device. The same was true for the feng shui masters of the ghost-raising sect. Almost all the people of the ghost-raising sect were focused on raising a ghost. Almost all the Taoist techniques had to be performed through the ghost. Once the ghost was damaged, the feng shui master himself would also be seriously injured. Just like Lin Zhong yesterday. On the other hand, feng shui cultivators who practiced the ghost-subduing technique were different. They used the soul-capturing technique to collect all kinds of children's souls. Then, they gathered these souls together and chanted incantations to strengthen them. When it was time to fight, the ghost subjugation master would summon all of these spirits and use them to descend. To put it simply, the ghost-raising sect raised one ghost, while the ghost-subduing technique raised a group of ghosts. As a black head master at the later stages of glorious consciousness, Lei Yang definitely had more than a dozen Yin souls on him. In his opinion, he only needed a dozen Yin souls to defeat Xie Qinghua. This was a good thing. When the ghost subjugation master descended, the number of Yin souls he summoned was directly proportional to the power of the black head technique. After all, Xie Qinghua was a feng shui master at the glorious consciousness realm. Against a dozen Yin souls, he should be able to escape unscathed. However, the reality was beyond my expectations. Xie Qinghua seemed to have lost all of his courage. Against a dozen Yin souls, he directly took out his natal celestial device. After receiving his Taoist qi, the sword-like celestial device emitted rays of qi. As he moved, they swept through the center of the venue, looking very intimidating. However, in reality, this was clearly Xie Chenghua putting on a brave front. After going berserk for a while, he only managed to kill 2 or 3 of the ghost subjugation master's ghosts. He had used up more than half of his Taoist qi. After Xie Chenghua came to a stop while gasping for breath, the ghost-taming master waved his hands and chanted another difficult incantation. The dozens of Yin's souls rushed forward and pounced on Xie Chenghua, then disappeared in the blink of an eye. The black head technique was separated from the art of witchcraft. The Gu master had absolute control over the life of the victim. Similarly, the black head master could also control the life of the victim. After Xie Chenghua was subdued, he stood there with a pale face. His face was full of panic. The people from the Nanyang Taoist sect laughed together, pointing at Xie Chenghua and mocking him. The people from the Guangdong branch also looked distressed. No matter what, Xie Chenghua was the president of the Zhuhai branch. Now that he was under the black head technique, his life was in the hands of the ghost subjugation master. What could they do? In the end, Chen Shuha stood up. His face was full of anger, but he had no choice but to lower his head and plead with the ghost subjugation master. The exchange competition is about communication. We admit defeat in this match. I wonder if you can dispel this black head technique? The ghost subjugation master sneered and said noncommittally, "We black head masters are only good at descending, but not at dispelling it. However, I heard that the xianmen of the Central Plains are extensive and profound. I believe a small ghost subjugation technique won't be difficult for you. Why do you have to come to me to dispel it?" There was a strong sense of mockery in his words. As soon as he said that, the Nanyang Taoists standing behind him roared with laughter. One by one they echoed, "Yeah, you Chinese people are so arrogant. Why are you looking for us for such a small matter?" Black head technique was the same as Gu. Every technique was very independent. Most of the time, only the black head technique master knew the method to dispel it. If others wanted to dispel it, they would have to be much stronger than the black head technique master. Their unreasonable words finally angered Chen Shuha. The old man's face flushed red. He no longer requested to dispel the black head technique master's surrender. Instead, he took a step back and said coldly, "You're right. The xianmen of the Central Plains are extensive and profound. We'll deal with the matter of dispelling it ourselves. You don't have to worry about it." As soon as he said this, President Su's expression changed. He moved closer to him and whispered, "Uncle Chen, this doesn't seem to be appropriate. We don't have anyone on our side who knows black head technique, and we're not as strong as the black head technique master. I know that these Nanyang monkeys are hateful, but this concerns Brother Chenghua's life. What do you think?" As soon as he finished speaking, Xie Chenghua, whose face was full of panic, moved closer and echoed with a face full of defeat, "That's right, Uncle Chen. Since we've lost this match, why don't we apologize to the Nanyang people and ask them to dispel the black head technique master? We can discuss the rest at length." "Fool! Coward!" Chen Shuha's face, which had just calmed down, instantly flushed red again. He reprimanded in exasperation, "If we lose this exchange match, we can still say that we, a corner of Guangdong, can't represent the xianmen of the Central Plains. After reporting this to the Xianmen Society, we can recruit people to compete with the Nanyang Taoist sections. But they've already said so much about dispelling the black head technique master. If we lower our heads, doesn't that mean that we admit that the xianmen of the Central Plains are inferior to the Nanyang Taoist sects? We can't say that even if we lose our lives." The old man was already old, but he still had a valiant spirit in his bones. He was also much more understanding of things. Unfortunately, Xie Chenghua was unwilling to give up his life. Resentment surged on his face, and his gaze toward Chen Shuha turned cold. He wasn't the only one. Even President Su and the others around him didn't think much of it. It was obvious that they had no choice but to give up. They were probably thinking that they had already lost the friendly competition. What was the difference if they lowered their heads or not? Their views seemed to be right. After a hasty truce, on the fourth day of the competition, the representative of the mainland, the president of the Foshan branch, Lu Chuanda, performed about the same as Xie Qinghua. In just a few short minutes, with the same dozen or so spirits, the ghost-taming master Lei Yang successfully dispelled the black head technique master and won another match. But this time, the people from the Guangdong branch didn't even have any resentment left. Their expressions became numb. Chapter 205. In terms of strength, I was confident that I could defeat a person in the middle stage of glorious memory. It wasn't that I was arrogant, but I had a clear understanding of the Nanyang Taoist technique. Pure Tao energy and sharp Yin energy. The Nanyang Taoists only cultivated Yin energy. On the surface, they looked strong, but in reality, they didn't have a strong foundation and naturally had shortcomings. Even a feng shui master in the later stage of glorious memory could only perform at the early stage of glorious memory when their techniques were countered. Coincidentally, among the powerful techniques that I had mastered, the Golden Light Incantation and the Pure Yang Incantation, they were extremely effective against this kind of evil Yin technique. As for Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda, their talents were limited, and they didn't know the Pure Yang technique that countered the evil Yin technique. That was why they were defeated. Up until now, I was the only one left from the Guangdong branch. As for the Nanyang Taoists, including the Ghost Conqueror who hadn't been defeated yet, there were 4 people left. I was confident that I could defeat one of them, but 4 in a row? It was impossible. Moreover, the Ghost Conqueror hadn't been defeated yet. He would definitely fight again, and I wasn't confident that I could defeat him. After the exchange competition ended, Chairman Su, Chen Shuha, and the others asked us to stay back to discuss how to report to the headquarters after the exchange competition. They also asked the headquarters to recruit more people to cause trouble for the Nanyang people. Of course, there were also people talking about how to deal with the aftermath. After all, the media was involved. No matter how the results of the exchange competition were reported, the reputation of the Guangdong branch would be ruined. Yes, everyone had already started discussing how to deal with the aftermath. No one had any hope for me. I even heard someone sigh and say that we shouldn't have been careless in the beginning and randomly signed up. If our Shenzhen branch had sent Chairman Su, we might have been able to fight for the last match and win to preserve our reputation. Only Zhang Canwen suggested that Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda talk about the Ghost Conqueror's technique so that I could prepare. In the end, the 2 of them stuttered for a long time and couldn't come up with a reason. Instead, they impatiently said that since we can't win, why do such useless things? Zhang Canwen was enraged. He opened his mouth and said, "The 2 matches that the 2 of you fought, you lost in just a few minutes. You didn't even manage to exhaust the Ghost Conqueror. If that wasn't the case, why didn't you have any hope of winning?" Their faces were ashen, but they were speechless. What Zhang Canwen said was the truth. Moreover, he was also a director of the headquarters. His strength was tyrannical, so they didn't dare to do anything to Zhang Canwen. In the end, they glared at me with hatred. Xie Qinghua said, "It was this brother Zhou Yi who provoked the Nanyang Dao sect. Now that they have come knocking on our door, we are no match for them in order to protect him. Is there anything wrong with that?" He had found a fig leaf, and Lu Chuanda, who was beside him, immediately echoed. There weren't many people who could accept their failure. Their words immediately resonated with many people. At least half of the people in the hall started to complain in low voices, saying that they were the ones who brought this disaster upon themselves. If they hadn't offended the Nanyang people first, this wouldn't have happened. Hearing their words, my heart turned cold. It was the same group of people. A few days ago, they had solemnly vowed that they wouldn't let the Nanyang people ride on our head. Now that their skills were inferior, they forgot their heroic words and started to complain to each other. I didn't open my mouth to speak, but the old Chen Shuha couldn't stand it anymore. He abruptly slammed the table and stood up. With a face full of anger, he glared at Xie Qinghua and the others and said bitterly, "We lost the exchange competition, we can't lose people as well. At the beginning, everyone said that the Nanyang Dao sect was bullying us. How did it become that our people were in the wrong first? Haven't we lost enough face?" After saying that, Chen Shuha angrily turned around and left the hall. Originally, we were going to discuss how to get Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda to surrender. However, as soon as Chen Shuha left, many others also left. In the end, only Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda were left. They looked at each other with puzzled expressions. I didn't know much about black magic, but if Tong Tong woke up, with her heavenly body, it wouldn't be a problem for her to deal with the Yin attribute demon descending technique. Originally, I wanted to tell the two of them, but now it seemed unnecessary. I smiled at them, then followed the crowd and left the hall. After returning to the hotel, I continued to cultivate as I had done for the past few days. No matter what others thought, I still seriously prepared for this battle. When I got up the next morning, I organized my things and contacted Wang Yongjun, asking him to arrange for Wang Kuan to drive to the Shenzhen branch and wait for me there. After making all the preparations, I got up and went to the Shenzhen branch to meet with the others. We arrived at the venue of the friendly competition, where we would officially start the last match. Although the situation was critical, my mind was still calm. However, this calm didn't last long. When the Nanyang Dao sect's people arrived at the venue, I was startled when I saw them. Not only me, but all the members of the Guangdong branch also changed their countenances. They were bewildered when they saw Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda standing in the middle of the Nanyang Dao sect's people. They were the presidents of the Zhuhai and Foshan branches, but they didn't come with the Guangdong branch's people. Instead, they mingled with the Nanyang Dao sect's people. What was going on? Before we could ask, the ghost-raising sect's elder, Lin Zhong, who had defeated Chen Shuha, stood up and said with a smile, "Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda have decided to leave the Metaphysics Society and join the Tri-Spirit sect in Malaysia. That's why they are now members of the Nanyang Dao sect." Hearing this, the members of the Guangdong branch were dumbfounded. They opened their eyes wide and gazed at Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda. They couldn't believe the truth in front of them. Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda slightly turned their heads. It seemed they didn't dare to look at the people of the Guangdong branch. However, they didn't deny it from the beginning. Chen Shuha was the first one to stand up and scold them. The others couldn't help but curse and swear. The Nanyang Dao sect and the Xian sects of the Central Plains weren't just about metaphysics, but also about race. Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda's actions weren't only betraying the Metaphysics Society, but also betraying their country. To a race that had always been loyal and filial, it was the most unforgivable sin. At this moment, Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda finally opened their mouths and said that they were forced to do this. They were under the influence of the black magic, and their lives were in danger. The ghost-raising sect had asked them to join the Nanyang Dao sect. To save their lives, they had no choice but to do this. Their helpless words couldn't calm people's anger. It was a bit difficult to ask the Nanyang Dao sect to put their lives above their own. However, it wasn't like there was no room for negotiation. No matter how arrogant the Nanyang Dao sect was, they were still in the country. It was fine if they were injured or killed during the competition. However, if they continued to harm people after the competition, the Metaphysics Society wouldn't be easy to deal with. Before everything was clear, the two of them had rashly pledged allegiance to the Nanyang Taoist sections. It was truly disappointing. The people of the Nanyang Dao sect were probably laughing their heads off. Defeating the Guangdong branch wasn't a big deal, no matter how they tried to change the concept. On the contrary, they had to risk angering the Metaphysics Society. Now, two branch chairmen had betrayed the Metaphysics Society and joined them. The influence of this matter was much greater than winning the competition. Although the Metaphysics Society would be angry, they wouldn't fall out because of this matter. Although everyone knew that this matter contained the meaning of a race's war, it was nothing more than a metaphysics war on the surface. After this incident, the entire Guangdong branch would lose face and would definitely become the laughingstock of the entire metaphysics world. Qin Shuhe, Zhang Canwen, and Chairman Su all had pale faces. They stood there and couldn't speak for a long time. In the end, Zhang Canwen walked in front of me and asked me with a gloomy face, "Zhou-yi, if you appear today, it's very likely that you will surrender. If you surrender and lose your life, will you be like those two beasts and become a traitor in order to survive?" I was silent for a while and finally shook my head. I valued my life more than anything else. I was even prepared to escape after the competition when I set off this morning. However, even so, I couldn't do what Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda did. Zhang Canwen nodded and extended his hand to pass Zhang Wenfei's Yin Yang Yama pen to me. He said, "Wenfei said that you don't have any offensive artifacts. This is more convenient to use, so he asked me to bring it over. You can use it." Chapter 206. Zhang Canwen's words made my heart feel even heavier. I did want to do my best to win this match, and I even promised that even if I was under a spell, I wouldn't stop Xie Chenghua and the others. But this didn't mean that I was willing to give up my life for this match. It was ironic, but my goal was actually similar to Xie Chenghua and the others, and that was to protect myself as much as possible. However, looking at Zhang Canwen's bloodshot eyes, I was silent for a while, and finally nodded. I lifted my feet and walked to the center of the open space. No matter what, I had to do my best. Of course, while doing my best, I still had to ensure my own safety. This sounded contradictory, but it was my only choice. Soon, the Ghost Descendant Master, Lei Yang, who I met 2 days ago, also walked out from the Nanyang Taoist faction. As soon as he saw me, he smiled sinisterly and asked, "Are you Zhou-yi, the one who killed Senior Brother Liang?" I cupped my fists and said noncommittally, "I am Zhou-yi." After saying that, I didn't waste any more time. I directly guided the Dao Qi and chanted the divine golden light spell. Lei Yang wanted to say something, but when he saw my actions, his eyes flashed sinisterly. He immediately took out a glass bottle and instantly summoned a dozen shadows that surged towards me. I had to say that Lei Yang didn't underestimate me at all. Even though he knew that I was in the pressure point realm, he didn't dare to be careless. It was no different from how he dealt with Xie Chenghua and the others 2 days ago. In fact, the speed at which he summoned the Ghost Descendant was even faster. I had used the divine golden light spell many times, so I was very familiar with it now. When the spirits rushed over, a circle of golden light rose from my body, blocking in front of the spirits. Spirits had spirits, but the spirits summoned by the Ghost Descendant technique didn't seem to have any intelligence. Even when they saw the golden circle of light, they didn't have any intention of dodging and directly collided with it. With a series of sizzling sounds, the dozens of ghosts collided with the golden halo. It was like throwing ice cubes into a fire. Their bodies disappeared in the blink of an eye, turning into black smoke that rose into the air. Lei Yang's face froze, and he seemed to not dare believe the scene before his eyes. When he recovered from his shock, these spirits had already transformed into black smoke and directly vanished from the arena, and not even a trace of them was left behind. The divine golden light mantra was one of the 8 great mantras of Taoism. With the combination of the original mantra, talismans, hand seals, astral steps, and incantations, its power could be said to be terrifying. It was especially effective against Yin spirits, zombies, and the like. Rumor had it that there was a golden light armor in the ancestral court of the righteous Tao. It was the source of the golden light spell. Even if an ordinary person were to wear it, all evil things that came close to it would be destroyed. Currently, I can only master the 3 techniques of the incantation, talisman, and hand seal, but this is still not something that Lei Yang's dozen or so Yin spirits can approach. After suffering a setback, Lei Yang's sinister expression lessened a bit, and his expression became more solemn. He took out a smaller porcelain bottle from his body, opened the lid, and raised his right hand. He used the nail of his thumb to cut his middle finger, and a string of beads of blood splashed out, falling right into the porcelain bottle. There was a blood curse in the tame head technique that only a high-level tame head master could use. It could greatly increase the power of the tame head technique. To be more specific, during the process of descending, the tame head master's blood essence would be used as a primer. Lei Yang's action of cutting his middle finger to draw blood was precisely this blood curse technique. In feng shui, there was also a saying about the blood from the tip of the tongue and the blood from the tip of the finger. However, feng shui masters cultivated Taoist qi, so the blood from their fingertips was pure yang blood. On the other hand, tame head master cultivated yin qi, so the blood from their fingertips was pure yin blood. There were many differences between the two. After Lei Yang's essence blood fell into the porcelain bottle, a dark gray mist instantly rose. It suddenly dissipated in the air, turning into dozens of black shadows that landed on the ground. They seemed to have surrounded me. It was easy to distinguish the power of the tame ghost technique. The more ghosts there were, the more powerful it would be. Lei Yang was enraged, and he wanted to use the most powerful tame head technique. I didn't dare to be careless. While maintaining the golden light divine incantation, I read the pure yang divine incantation. Although the golden light divine incantation had a strong restraining effect on ghosts, it could only be used to defend. I was confident that I could stop the dozens of ghosts in front of me. However, Lei Yang was a tame ghost master at the later stage of glorious memory. He had many tricks up his sleeve. Sooner or later, the golden light divine incantation would be exhausted by the Taoist qi. To find a chance to win, I had to take the initiative and attack. The pure yang divine incantation was also one of the 8 great divine incantations of Taoism. However, it was much more complicated and profound than the golden light divine incantation. I wasn't able to use it as easily as I wanted to. Only when the dozens of ghosts had exhausted the golden halo around me did I finally draw out the pea candle flame. Because of the ghosts, the temperature in the venue had dropped a lot, making people feel cold. However, when the pea candle flame appeared on my fingertip, the previous coldness disappeared and was replaced by warmth. After using 2 divine incantations, the Taoist qi in my body had been used up. I felt a little dizzy. Taking advantage of the fact that the golden halo around me hadn't completely disappeared, I pulled myself together and waved my hand. The pea candle flame floated towards Lei Yang. At the same time, I grabbed the jade bracelet and quickly replenished my Taoist qi. Even though Lei Yang was a member of the Nanyang Taoist faction, he was at the later stages of glorious memory, so he naturally had some knowledge. When he saw the pea candle flame, his expression instantly changed. Without any hesitation, he took out 2 porcelain bottles that were similar to the previous ones and used the blood divine incantation to quickly summon almost 100 ghosts. This time, he didn't command the ghosts to descend towards me. Instead, he surrounded himself and looked at the pea candle flame with a bewildered expression. Even the people from the Guangdong branch exclaimed in surprise. They pointed at the candle flame and said something in bewilderment. However, all of my attention was focused on Lei Yang, so I didn't notice anything. Finally, the candle flame floated in front of Lei Yang and touched the ghosts that had descended. Just like the divine golden light incantation from before, once the ghost formed the candle flame, it immediately turned into a wisp of black smoke and dissipated. However, the difference was that the divine golden light incantation still needed to come into contact with the ghost. Once the candle flame floated over, any ghost that came within 3 feet of the candle flame would instantly disappear without a trace. Seeing this scene, I heaved a sigh of relief. As a ghost-subduing master, Lei Yang's skills were all on ghosts. Even though a ghost-subduing master of his level had a lot of ghosts around him, the Golden Light Divine Incantation and Pure Yang Divine Incantation were enough to block his spells. In addition, I had the Jade Bracelet that could continuously replenish my Taoist Qi. A Feng Shui master at the Glorious Memory Realm definitely had more Taoist Qi or Yin Qi stored in his body than I did. However, he didn't have any items to replenish his Yin Qi. If we continued to fight in a stalemate, I would have a higher chance of winning. It seemed that it was true. After more than 100 ghosts were destroyed by the Pure Yang Divine Incantation, Lei Yang reached out his hand and took out 2 more porcelain bottles. He summoned more than 100 ghosts to protect him. It seemed that he really wanted to drag it out with me. Just as I heaved a sigh of relief, Lei Yang suddenly sat cross-legged on the spot. He closed his eyes and muttered an incantation. I had a bad premonition, but I couldn't think of what kind of spell Lei Yang was going to use. I could only stand there and be vigilant. I had to stay put and deal with the situation. Around 2 minutes later, Lei Yang finally moved. To be exact, his head finally moved. Lei Yang suddenly opened his eyes. His body was still sitting cross-legged, but his head had suddenly soared into the air. I was startled. I had heard about the Nanyang Tame Head Technique and the Flying Head Technique. However, I didn't expect that Lei Yang, a ghost-subduing master, would also practice the Flying Head Technique. The Flying Head Technique was a technique where the Tame Head Technique master used a talisman to descend and make his head fly away from his body to increase his power. Among all the Tame Head Techniques, the Flying Head Technique was the strangest and most powerful one. According to the legends, when the Flying Head Technique was practiced, the master had to endure the pain of having his neck broken. Moreover, his stomach and intestines were still connected to his head. The master couldn't fly more than 3 meters above the ground. Moreover, he had to go out every night to suck the blood of children. After 49 days, he would finish the first stage. Only after he finished the 7th stage could he master the Flying Head Technique. At that time, the master wouldn't have to worry about his stomach and intestines anymore. Moreover, his flying speed and height would increase, and his fighting power would increase by leaps and bounds. After Lei Yang's head flew up, his eyes glinted with a bloodthirsty light. He flew directly toward me. He was so fast that I didn't have time to urge the Golden Light Divine Incantation. I had to summon the Pure Yang Candle Flame to block in front of me. Fortunately, the Pure Yang Candle Flame's Yang Qi was extremely dense. Even though Lei Yang had used the Flying Head Technique, he didn't dare to break through the Pure Yang Candle Flame. For a moment I was in a deadlock with him. Unfortunately, without the suppression of the Pure Yang Candle Flame, the spirits in the distance regrouped and rushed toward me again. It wasn't difficult to deal with the Flying Head Technique alone. However, when the tame ghosts and spirits pounced on me, I was destined to lose sight of them. I had no choice but to chant the Golden Light Divine Incantation again to block my surroundings. This time, the Tao Qi that I had just recovered was used up again in the blink of an eye. Lei Yang had obviously discovered my intentions. He didn't give me any time to recover my Tao Qi. With his many methods, he forced me into a situation where my Tao Qi was being rapidly consumed. In this way, even with the true dragon vein, I couldn't recover my Tao Qi quickly. The situation became dangerous again. This time, I didn't have a good way to deal with him. I could only continue the deadlock with him and see who could last until the end. Shortly after, under the continuous attacks of the tame ghosts and spirits, the Golden Light Divine Incantation ghosts I had just summoned vanished. Most of the tame ghosts and spirits had disappeared, leaving only a dozen or so. I hurried to take out a golden light talisman that I had prepared earlier to block them. While I heaved a sigh of relief, Lei Yang's headless body suddenly took out 2 porcelain bottles. After opening the lids, he didn't even chant the incantation and directly released the spirit. This time I was dumbfounded. No wonder Lei Yang, a tame ghost master, wanted to learn the flying head technique. It turned out he could use both at the same time. This time, the power wasn't as simple as 1+1. It was several times stronger. While the newly summoned spirits were attacking me, Lei Yang's head crazily attacked me. He even got close to the pure yang candle flame a few times. Half of his face was burned black. However, he didn't care and continued to attack. Compared to the tame ghosts and spirits, the flying head technique was obviously more terrifying. I couldn't help but pay more attention to it. As I blocked left and right, I seemed to be in a very difficult situation. However, even though I was in a difficult situation, I didn't last too long because the tame ghosts and spirits had finally gotten close to me and were crazily attacking me. I hastily used the various talismans on my body to block them. Afterwards, the dozens of spirits behind me pounced on me and disappeared. In an instant, I felt as if my body had entered a cold cellar. The surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped by a lot. Lei Yang's head laughed twice before quickly flying back to his body. At the same time, I quickly retracted the pure yang candle flame and frantically absorbed the Dao Qi in the jade bracelet. After that, I did my best to expel the cold yin energy from my body. It was a pity that even though I was in a stalemate with Lei Yang for a long time, in terms of power, his glorious knowledge late-stage power was far above mine. I was unable to expel the tame ghost technique with just Dao Qi. After trying for a long time, it was to no avail. Lei Yang had already stood up and said to me with a smile, as expected of the person who killed Senior Liang with a sneak attack. As expected of the most talented feng shui master in the continent's Metaphysics Association. You should be proud that you were able to last so long in front of me with just your pressure point realm. Even though he said that, I didn't feel proud at all. Instead, my mind was frantically working as I prepared to escape. At that moment, I had already surrendered. I had already lost the duel. At the same time, the sparring competition had also come to an end. Next would be the time to settle the score. The people from the Nanyang Taoist faction would definitely request to bring me away. Under such a crushing defeat, the Guangdong branch had no reason to reject them. Danger was about to arrive, and before that, I had to escape first. Thus, I couldn't care about anything else as I frantically absorbed the Dao Qi from the jade bracelet. Even though I had made preparations and gotten Wang Kuan to drive the car and wait for me outside, it definitely wasn't an easy task to escape from so many glorious knowledge realm feng shui masters. At the very least, I would need a large amount of Dao Qi to support me. At that moment, Lei Yang walked in front of me and smiled sinisterly as he continued, "You've already been affected by the tame ghost technique. It's not that I'm boasting, but other than me, you definitely won't be able to find a second person who can remove the tame ghost technique. Of course, your continent's heavenly master might be able to remove the tame ghost technique, but the tame ghost technique will take effect in 3 days. I'm afraid that it's already too late for you to find a heavenly master now. Why don't you imitate Mr. Xie and Mr. Lu and join our Sanling sect? As long as you're willing to join, I can immediately remove the tame ghost technique and help you contact our Sanling sect's Grand Supreme Elder. He will take you in as a disciple. What do you think?" I closed my eyes and felt the cold energy in my body. Before I could say anything, I heard Tong Tong's voice in my head. "Brother, why are there so many spirits in your body? Let me help you expel them?" Just as she said that, before I could reply, I felt an even more intense cold energy flow through my body. After the cold energy disappeared, the previous coldness also disappeared. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't because Tong Tong removed the tame ghost from my body, but because Tong Tong had woken up. Chapter 207. Hearing my words, Lei Yang revealed a disdainful smile and said, "After you've been subdued, your life is in my hands. Brother Zhou, why do you need to struggle so much?" After saying that, he raised his head as if he wanted to confirm his words. But right at that moment, Lei Yang's expression suddenly changed and he coughed repeatedly. After a while, he raised his head with blood on the corner of his mouth and stared at me in disbelief. The sudden turn of events confused both parties, but of course I knew what had happened. Tong Tong had helped me eliminate the ghost in my body, and it was only now that the removal was complete. The black magic was connected to the black magic master's heart and blood. Since the ghost in my body was forcefully removed, it was inevitable that Lei Yang would be injured. After a moment of silence, Lei Yang finally asked, How did you remove my ghost descending technique? I raised my head and smiled. The techniques of the central planes are broad and profound. It's just a small ghost descending technique. It's not hard to remove. This was what Lei Yang had said the day before when Xie Chenghua had been subdued. However, he had said it because he was mocking me. Today, when I said it again, it was like a slap to his face. Lei Yang wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his expression became cold again. He didn't want to dwell on this question and said to me coldly, Although I don't know how you removed my ghost descending technique, if I can subdue you once, I can subdue you a second time. You're right, this battle isn't over yet. After saying that, he didn't hesitate and solemnly took out a small bronze cauldron. Without saying anything, he cut his middle finger and dripped his blood into the cauldron. Soon, large clouds of black gas came out of the cauldron and floated to the ground, turning into ghosts. In just a few seconds, the not-so-spacious venue was once again filled with ghosts. However, there was still a thick layer of black gas on the bronze cauldron in Lei Yang's hand. Clearly, not all the ghosts inside had been released. After doing that, Lei Yang sat cross-legged on the ground again. However, he didn't use the flying head technique this time. He just looked at me coldly and said, This soul cauldron is my Sanling sect's sacred item. It contains all the ghosts collected by the previous sect masters of my Sanling sect. I want to see if you can solve my ghost-subduing art a second time after resolving it once. As soon as he said that, countless ghosts in the middle of the hall roared and crazily stormed toward me. The ghost-subduing technique was related to the number of ghosts that could be controlled. At this time, I didn't have the protection of the Golden Light Divine Incantation and the Pure Yang Divine Incantation. With so many ghosts, I was under great pressure. However, I didn't move. I didn't use the square sky fan or chant the Pure Yang Spirit Mantra. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the ground. Based on the spells and magic tools that I had on me, these two incantations were naturally the most effective in dealing with these spirits. Thus, I had been using these two incantations previously. But now that Tong Tong had awakened, it was more reasonable for her to deal with these spirits. I also said to Lei Yang in a clear voice, Nanyang's ghost-raising and ghost-subduing daos are both derived from the daos of the Xian sects of the Central Plains. Since today is an exchange competition, I will use the daos of the Xian sects of the Central Plains to exchange pointers with Brother Lei. Then, I called Tong Tong to come out of the jade bracelet. Before calling Tong Tong out, I had asked her about it. After a long sleep, she had smoothly broken through to the glorious knowledge realm. Moreover, to prevent others from recognizing her identity as a heavenly embryo, I had asked her to use Yin energy to conceal her appearance. She had also used the aura of the countless ghosts in the jade bracelet to conceal her own aura. Seeing Tong Tong's appearance, not only were the people from the Nanyang Daoist faction surprised, but the people from the Guangdong branch were also shocked. Except for Zhang Wenfei and a few others, the others were dumbfounded. A talented geomancer was raising ghosts that couldn't even be seen in public. To the people from the Metaphysics Association, it was unbelievable. I didn't mind their gazes. I just smiled and secretly introduced the taming technique to Tong Tong. Then, I asked her if she had the confidence to deal with it. Tong Tong lifted her small face and said disdainfully, She has swallowed a lot of the ghosts from the jade bracelet. This time, she can use these ghosts to replenish her energy. I couldn't help but smile. Tong Tong, this little girl, was becoming more and more adorable. When the people from the Nanyang Taoist faction saw that I had also summoned ghosts, their faces instantly changed. Ghosts and spirits were their most common methods. Now I, a member of the Xian men from the Central Plains, wanted to use this method to deal with them. To them, it was a humiliation. However, Tong Tong's glorious knowledge realm aura was really thick. Moreover, because of the endless ghosts in the jade bracelet, her Yin energy was even thicker than Lei Yang's. She seemed to be at the late stage of glorious knowledge. The people from the Nanyang Taoist faction were all at the glorious knowledge realm. Naturally, they could see Tong Tong's aura. Everyone's face darkened. Lei Yang's face also darkened. However, he still commanded the ghosts to swarm toward Tong Tong. However, the strange thing was that when the ghosts were around 1 meter away from Tong Tong, they didn't want to take another step forward. Instead, they anxiously circled around. No matter how Lei Yang tried to control them, it was useless. The corners of my lips curled up. The natural birth ghost infant was extremely oppressive to ghosts of the same level, not to mention the ghosts that were much weaker than Tong Tong. Facing Tong Tong's pressure, they couldn't even get close to her, let alone attack. It seemed like Tong Tong was the nemesis of the Nanyang Taoist faction. At this moment, Lei Yang's face darkened. He didn't care that there were so many people present. He gritted his teeth and summoned more ghosts from the bronze soul cauldron in an attempt to use numbers to create an advantage. The power of the ghost descending technique was determined by numbers. However, it was a pity that this law didn't work against Tong Tong. After looking at the ghosts with interest for a long time, Tong Tong seemed to feel bored. She picked up the jade bracelet and casually waved it. The large number of ghosts in front of her instantly disappeared. The entire process was extremely quick. Apart from me, no one else could see that Tong Tong had taken the ghosts away. Lei Yang, who was sitting cross-legged in the distance, looked happy. I guessed he thought that Tong Tong had attacked the ghost. He hurried to summon more ghosts from the bronze soul cauldron to fill the gap and continue to pressure Tong Tong. I almost burst out laughing. It seemed Lei Yang wanted to use the number of ghosts to exhaust Tong Tong. However, Tong Tong was just using the jade bracelet to absorb ghosts. To put it bluntly, it was like throwing a meat bun at a dog. No matter how many ghosts Lei Yang had, Tong Tong wouldn't reject them. She would take in as many as she could. I had heard that ghost descending masters needed a long time to accumulate ghosts to increase their realm. Their strength was directly proportional to the number of ghosts they had. I'm really worried about how high Lei Yang's strength will be after this battle. After that, the battles in the arena became very boring. Lei Yang summoned spirits very quickly, but Tong Tong used the jade bracelet to absorb spirits even faster. After a few minutes, Lei Yang's speed could no longer keep up. The number of spirits in the arena disappeared at a visible rate. In the end, when not a single ghost could be seen, Lei Yang's hands finally began to tremble. He stopped summoning ghosts. Instead, he stared blankly at Tong Tong, as if his entire being had turned into a fool. Tong Tong wasn't in a hurry. She just stood there, smiling at him. What the hell is that thing? I just used more than 10,000 ghosts. Even a heavenly master would have to frown a few times. But now, in less than 10 minutes, more than 10,000 ghosts have disappeared. What the hell is that thing? Lei Yang was silent for a long time. Then, he finally broke down. His eyes were bloodshot. He stared at Tong Tong and roared crazily. Before Tong Tong and I could respond, Lei Yang seemed to have thought of something. He murmured, "That's right. You aren't afraid of ghosts, but you must be afraid of my flying head descending technique. You bitch, hand over your life." As soon as he finished speaking, he sat cross-legged and recited a spell. His head suddenly separated from his body and flew towards Tong Tong. The flying head descending technique was far inferior to Tong Tong's heavenly Yin constitution. Moreover, Lei Yang was already an arrow at the end of its flight. How could he be a match for Tong Tong? Tong Tong waved his hands and two black threads gushed out from between his fingers. He waved them in the air and wrapped them around Lei Yang's head. Before he could struggle, a wisp of black mist gushed out from the two black threads and wrapped around Lei Yang's head. Almost instantly, Lei Yang's head let out a miserable howl, and then black blood crazily surged out of his 7 orifices. At the same time, Lei Yang's headless body trembled violently. Thick black blood seeped out of his pores. It quickly soaked his clothes and flowed to the ground. Chapter 208. After seeing Lei Yang's death, I was also startled. However, I understood that it wasn't because Tong Tong was ruthless. It was because of the limitations of the taming technique. The fiercer the taming technique was, the more dangerous it was. This was especially true for the flying head descent, which controlled the user's head to leave the body. If the user wasn't careful, he would die. Tong Tong had just used his heavenly Yin energy to cut off the connection between Lei Yang's head and body. He hadn't killed him yet. Who would have thought that Lei Yang would turn into a puddle of blood and die? This was also a common problem with Nanyang's sorcery. Compared to the gentle qi of the Wei, its power was still great, but the risk of cultivating it was also great. Not to mention during battle, even during normal cultivation, the slightest carelessness could lead to life-threatening danger. Seeing Lei Yang die in the venue, the people from the Nanyang Daoist faction shut their mouth. No one spoke for quite a long time. Their faces were dark and gloomy. Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda, who had just announced that they had defected to the Nanyang Daoist faction, stood there as if their souls had left their bodies. They looked as if they had just lost their parents. I tried to suppress my emotions. Then I understood. After they had defected to the Nanyang Daoist faction, the ghost descending technique on them hadn't been undone. Now that Lei Yang was dead, no one could undo the ghost descending technique. Tong Tong had undone Lei Yang's ghost descending technique once. It wouldn't be difficult for him to help them do it again. Unfortunately, after they had defected, they had lost this chance. I asked Tong Tong to return to the jade bracelet. Then, I left the venue and returned to the people of the Guangdong branch. The people from the Nanyang Daoist faction finally reacted. 2 people wearing the same attire as Lei Yang walked out. They collected Lei Yang's body and belongings. Then, Elder Lin Zhong of the ghost-raising sect came out. His face was dark and gloomy. He asked us to call a truce for today and to fight again tomorrow. From the beginning of the competition until now, our Guangdong branch had taken the initiative to call a truce every day. This was the first time the Nanyang Daoist faction had asked for a truce. Presidents Su and Chen Shuha nodded in agreement. The people from the Nanyang Daoist faction left the venue with their tails between their legs. This time, they didn't make a ruckus or mock them. When they reached the entrance, facing a group of excited Hong Kong reporters, none of them stopped to accept the interview. Instead, they left as fast as they could. After the Nanyang person disappeared, Zhang Canwen jumped in front of me and punched my shoulder. He said loudly, "Brat, good job." A taming master at the later stages of glory of consciousness was defeated by you just like that. After he said that, I reacted. Lei Yang was a taming master at the later stage of glorious theory. If this matter was spread out, the metaphysics world would be in an uproar. Of course, I wasn't too proud of myself. Rather than saying that I had defeated Lei Yang, it would be more accurate to say that I had defeated Tong. Moreover, this is also because of the special identity of Lei Yang's taming headmaster. If it were a feng shui master at the late stage of glorious past from the Xianmen of the Central Plains, Tong Tong and I would not be able to defeat him. While I had a clear understanding of myself, I was still worried. Previously, after the Lu family had crippled my cultivation foundation, it seemed that the grudge had ended. However, if Lu Zhenyang heard about what happened today, would he make a move on me? Although I had grandfather Li's protection, if the Lu family could completely destroy my life the last time, they would be able to do the same next time. Originally, when I was heading south, I had already decided to keep a low profile in the future, at least until I solved the Liu family's problem. However, I never expected that I would once again stand in the eye of the storm at this exchange. However, since it had already come to this, there was nothing to regret. I could only be more careful in the future. It wasn't just Zhang Canwen, but Chen Shuhe, President Su, and even everyone from the Guangdong branch all walked in front of me and congratulated me excitedly. Everyone's grief and indignation were swept away, and they started to think about the upcoming competition. The people from the Nanyang Daoist faction were all at the Glory of Consciousness realm, but Lei Yang, who was at the later stages of Glory of Consciousness, was already considered to be at the pinnacle of his cultivation. Even he had been defeated. Who else from the Nanyang Daoist faction would be able to fight against me? Everyone had the same thought, as if they had forgotten the lesson they had learned earlier. Only I was still a little scared. According to the current situation, the Nanyang Daoist faction didn't have anyone who could fight against me. However, I was afraid that the Nanyang Daoist faction would have someone who cultivated orthodox mystical technique. He didn't need to be at the later stages of Glory of Consciousness, but at the middle stages of Glory of Consciousness. At that time, without the special suppression from the pupils, I would definitely lose, as I was only at the pressure point realm, and my pupils had just reached the Glory of Consciousness realm. My realm hadn't stabilized yet, so I would definitely lose. However, I couldn't tell the others about this, so I could only stay vigilant. After everyone discussed excitedly for a long time, I told them that I still had a competition tomorrow, so I went back to rest early. When I returned to the hotel, I called Tong Tong out and chatted with her for a long time. Tong Tong told me that she had a proper Ghost King cultivation base. While she had been asleep for the past few days, she had swallowed tens of thousands of souls to reach this realm. There weren't many souls left in the jade bracelet. However, with the help of Lei Yang's 10,000 souls, she could cultivate faster. Not only did the heavenly ghost infant suppress other Yin spirits of the same realm in terms of the grade of their Yin Qi soul, but their cultivation talent was also extremely strong. As long as there was enough high-grade Yin Qi to absorb, or an endless number of Yin spirits to devour, they would never stop cultivating their eyes. It was also the reason why she had reached the Ghost King realm in just a few years. After chatting for a long time, I told Tong Tong about the Nanyang Daoist faction's situation. Tong Tong didn't need to do much to deal with Lei Yang, but the situation wasn't clear yet. We couldn't be careless. Early the next morning, I arrived at the Shenzhen branch. When I got in, I saw Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda kneeling in the lobby on the first floor. Chen Shuhe, President Su, and the others were standing in front of them. They were talking to them angrily. I was a little dumbfounded. These two had come here because they wanted me to help them surrender. However, in just 2 days, they had betrayed us and then returned. These two made me speechless. When I walked in front of them, Chen Shuhe was bitterly saying to the two people, "The Metaphysics Society isn't a place where you can enter and leave whenever you want. Also, don't try to change the topic. Everyone knows what happened yesterday. Don't even think about helping us surrender. Even if Zhou Yi agrees, I won't agree. You can go home and wait for your death. You can ask the Nanyang Daoist faction for help. However, don't show up in the Guangdong branch. This time, I won't hold you accountable. However, if you people from the Nanyang Daoist faction barge into our Metaphysics Society's territory, it won't be easy for you to leave." Chen Shuhe didn't give them any face. Xie Chenghua and Lu Chuanda were panic-stricken. After listening to him, tears and snot rolled down their cheeks. They looked extremely pitiful. However, everyone at the scene looked at them coldly. Not a single one of them showed any signs of sympathy, including me. Since what happened yesterday had happened, anyone with a healthy mind wouldn't have any sympathy for the two of them. Metaphysics had no borders, but humans did. Chen Shuhe saw that I had arrived, but he didn't ask for my opinion. He immediately got people to chase Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda away. Then, he turned around and put on a smile. He asked me how my body was feeling today. After exchanging a few pleasantries, the people from the Nanyang Taoist faction arrived. Both sides didn't say anything else and walked onto the stage. The one representing the Nanyang Taoist faction was an elder from the ghost-raising sect. His name was Ji Guolong. Before he went up, Chen Shuha secretly told me that this person's cultivation was only at the early stages of glory of consciousness. I nodded. It seemed that my earlier guess was right. Although the Nanyang Taoist faction had made ample preparations, it was still a small place. How many experts could they have? Previously, Lin Zhong and Lei Yang were probably the strongest in the group. It would be hard for the others to have a late stage of glory of consciousness. If we won, there were still 3 more matches. I didn't dare to use my pupil too early, so I didn't summon Tong Tong from the start. Instead, I used my own power to take out the square sky fan, golden light divine incantation, and other defensive artifacts to fight against the spirits that Ji Guolong had summoned. I originally had the thought of exhausting his strength, but I didn't think that this Ji Guolong didn't have any initiative. I reckon that he also had the same thought of exhausting his strength. After fighting with me for several hours, I finally called Tong Tong out to help me and barely defeated him. After winning another match, a bad thought emerged in my mind. Chapter 209. On the 7th day of the competition, the representative of the Nanyang Taoist faction was a skinny old man wearing a white cloak. His body was covered in tattoos. He called himself Li Yi, the White-Cloved Ozan. I wasn't familiar with the name White-Cloved Ozan. After listening to Zhang Canwen's introduction, I learned that it was a group of cultivators from Southeast Asia. He was different from the ghost-nurturing sect and the taming headmaster, which originated from the Xianmen of the Central Plains. The White-Cloved Ozan's magic technique didn't have much to do with the Xianmen of the Central Plains. Instead, it was related to Tibetan Buddhism. Moreover, the magic tool that the White-Cloved Ozan used was the Buddhist amulet that had been circulating for many years. According to the legends, the Buddhist amulets were made by Thai monks who had great achievements in cultivation. Ordinary amulets could help people ward off disasters. However, some monks with profound cultivation bases could make Buddhist amulets with great power. They were similar to the magic tools of the Xianmen. It sounded mysterious and related to religion. After Zhang Canwen finished, I worriedly asked, "In the Xianmen world, Buddhism has always been mysterious. I don't have any experience. I'm afraid it won't be easy to deal with them." After listening to me, Zhang Canwen sneered and said indifferently, "What Buddhists? These Thai people talk about the Buddhist amulets of eminent monks. But if you look carefully, you'll see that the amulets are sealing little ghosts and evil spirits. Don't be fooled by the name. Actually, this amulet doesn't have much to do with Buddhism. You just need to deal with it the same way you dealt with the taming headmaster." After listening to Zhang Canwen, I felt relieved. I walked to the center of the arena. The White-Cloved Ozan was skinny and dark. When he saw me, he didn't say anything or show any etiquette. He raised the amulet in his hand and placed it on top of his head. I couldn't help but look at the amulet. A 3-armed Buddha was carved on it. Before I could take a closer look, the Buddha's eyes suddenly shot out 2 beams of black light. Then, a strange and evil aura shot out of the amulet. It moved as fast as lightning and directly invaded my body. Suddenly, my head felt as if it had been hit by something. An intense dizziness filled my head, and everything in front of me turned black. I couldn't see anything clearly. I was shocked and hurriedly circulated my Dao Qi. I took out my square heavenly fan and prepared to defend myself. However, the strange thing was that although I could sense my Dao Qi, I couldn't circulate it at all. It was as if something had directly cut off the connection between me and my Dao Qi. I couldn't see anything, and I couldn't use my Dao energy. I panicked and lifted my feet, wanting to retreat. At that moment, Tong Tong's voice suddenly sounded in my head. "Brother, I'll deal with this person." As soon as I said that, I felt Tong Tong come out of the jade bracelet and move toward the white-cloved Azan. With Tong Tong's help, the pressure in my heart was greatly reduced. I took a deep breath to suppress the panic in my heart. I closed my eyes and chanted the tranquil heart incantation. After my mind had completely calmed down, the Tao Qi in my body quickly circulated. The evil and mysterious aura was finally completely expelled from my body. When I opened my eyes again, my eyes had already returned to normal. I hurriedly looked at Tong Tong and the white-cloved Azan. After a glance, I relaxed. From the time I had closed my eyes and chanted the tranquil heart incantation until now, it had only been around 1 minute. However, Tong Tong had already gained the upper hand. She had used her black threads to tie up the white-cloved Azan's hands. Even the amulet in his hand had fallen to the ground. However, this person's technique was indeed mysterious. Even when his body was tied up, the densely packed tattoos on his body actually emitted a layer of greenish-black light, and he was still trying his best to resist the Yin-Chi threads in his eyes. With Tong Tong's absolute advantage, this person didn't resist for long. Around half a minute later, the dark blue light around his body disappeared. Tong Tong's black threads had directly tied him up like a rice dumpling. With a pale face, he fell to the ground. He didn't have the strength to resist anymore. After the people from the Nanyang Taoist sect admitted defeat, Tong Tong let go of the white-clothed Azan and returned to the jade bracelet. The victory was considered easy, but I was a little worried in my heart because when Tong Tong returned, I saw that she had a tired expression on her face. Even though she didn't say it, I could feel that this short battle wasn't as easy as it seemed on the surface. Zhang Kanwen was the first to walk over. He reached out his hand and hammered my shoulder. He smiled and said, "Look, this Bulsh *T white-cloved Azan is just SOSO. You took care of him in just 5 minutes. It seems that this person's power is much weaker than the previous ones." I smiled wryly and shook my head. Zhang Kanwen's words were gravely mistaken. In terms of danger, the previous few added together couldn't compare to this white-cloved Azan. Although I had used a shorter amount of time, my victory was far from easy. Especially when the mysterious power of the amulet made me fall for it. Fortunately, Tong Tong wasn't a spirit that I had raised, so she took the initiative to judge the situation and appear from the jade bracelet, helping me resolve the crisis. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Just as I was about to explain, Chen Shuhe also walked over. He had obviously heard what Zhang Kanwen had said and said, "Don't listen to this kid's nonsense." Nanyang's mysterious techniques have their own specialties. In terms of inheritance, they can't be compared to our Central Plains mysterious technique. However, in terms of evil, they are superior. If you aren't careful, you will fall into their trap. Although you won this round, you can't be careless. Nanyang will send Azan for the next round. His cultivation is even higher than the previous person. Do you think we should compete again tomorrow? I nodded. Tong Tong needed to rest now. I also needed time to ponder the evil and mysterious aura from the amulet today. Thus, both sides stopped fighting. The people from the Nanyang Daoist faction left first. Just as I was about to return to the hotel, President Su called me. "They have agreed to an interview. Do you want to stay for an interview?" I couldn't help but laugh. A few days ago, when the people from the Metaphysics Society saw the reporters, they didn't have a good expression. Let alone accepting an interview, they didn't even bother to talk to us. Now, they wanted me to accept an interview. I thought about it and shook my head. If I had the energy, I'd better go back and rest. I could also prepare for the final battle tomorrow. After returning to the hotel, I was heading to my room when I suddenly frowned. I felt that someone was following me. The hotel was a public place, so it wasn't a big deal to have someone following me. However, I felt the aura of Tao, and there were two of them. Thus, I stopped in my tracks and turned my head around vigilantly. I discovered that Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda were following behind me. It wasn't beyond my expectations that they would come to find me. I sneered and walked in front of them. "Fellow Taoists from the Nanyang Taoist faction, why are you following me?" When they heard the way I addressed them, their eyelids twitched. Then, they put on a long face and begged. They came to me to get rid of the black magic spell. They hope that I can save them. I sneered and ridiculed them. "You've already joined a black magic spell sect. Do you still need me to get rid of it?" As soon as I said that, the two of them looked regretful. They sighed and said that they were muddle-headed and that they were forced to join the ghost exorcist Lei Yang's sect. They regretted it for a long time and hoped that I could give them a chance to turn over a new leaf. They sounded pitiful, but I knew that they didn't know how to get rid of Lei Yang after seeing him die. I didn't know how long it would take for the Nanyang Taoist faction to bring them back to Nanyang to find an expert to get rid of them. It would be better for them to try their luck here. I originally wanted to reject them, but after thinking for a moment I asked them, "If I help you get rid of the black magic spell, will you be able to repay me?" When Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda heard that there was hope, they immediately became excited. They looked at each other and said without hesitation, "As long as we can get rid of the black magic spell, we can agree to any condition." The two of them were obviously forced into a dead end. After saying that, they even knelt in front of me. I pondered for a moment and didn't immediately make a decision. Instead, I secretly asked Tong Tong if there was any method to plant a restriction in a person's body. The black magic spell was essentially to plant a restriction in a person's body to control them. Since Tong Tong could get rid of the black magic spell, she must have a similar method to the black magic spell. After asking, it was just as I had guessed. Tong Tong said that she had a similar method. Moreover, it was much more advanced than the black magic spell. It was a restriction technique recorded in the Art of Godhood that I had given her. After getting this answer, I nodded to Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda and brought them to my room. I called Tong Tong and got rid of the black magic spell in their bodies. At the same time, I asked Tong Tong to plant the restriction in their bodies. Chapter 210. After Tong Tong was done, I sat on the sofa and smiled at the two of them. "Now that the black magic in your body has been removed, you can feel it." The two of them closed their eyes to sense it, and their faces instantly revealed ecstasy as they expressed their gratitude to me excitedly. I waved my hand and the smile on my face slowly turned cold. "You said that as long as I remove the black magic, I can agree to any condition, right?" After hearing what I said, the smiles on their faces faded a little, but they still nodded at me. I didn't hide it and said directly, "The two of you betrayed the Metaphysics Society and are unfamiliar with the Nanyang Taoist faction. It will be hard for you to establish a foothold there. How about working for me in the future?" Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda's smiles became even more unnatural. After a while, the short and fat Lu Chuanda was the first to nod and say, "You're a young phoenix with 4 meridians. Your future accomplishments will definitely be far above ours. We won't be at a disadvantage if we work with you." After he expressed his stance, Xie Qinghua couldn't sit still anymore. He quickly nodded and said, "Old Lu is right. We won't be losing out if we work for you. However, the two of us used to be the leaders of a guild and have our own businesses. If we work for you, our businesses will be abandoned," he said hesitantly, but it was obvious that he was bargaining. I smiled and didn't leave any room for negotiation. I said directly, "I can give you a few days to go back and sell your businesses, then come find me. I'll say the ugly words first. If I can remove the black magic, then I can remove it. Both of your bodies have the black magic that I've placed in them." "What?" Both of them were taken aback, and their faces darkened in an instant. I didn't say anything and just sat there, looking at them with a smile. After being silent for a while, Lu Chuanda sighed and nodded as though he had accepted his fate. He told me that he would settle his matters in a week and come find me. Xie Qinghua nodded helplessly and also asked for a week's time. With the threat of the black magic, the two of them finally gave in. After everything was settled, I let the two of them settle their own matters and agreed to meet here in a week's time. After they left, I put this incident aside and began to think about the trick that Zan had used today. After studying it for a long time, I still couldn't understand the evil power that had entered my body at the beginning. However, with this experience, I would be more prepared next time. It wouldn't be that easy to fall into that trap. As for whether they could win in the end, it would depend on who the Nanyang Dao sect would send out tomorrow. It was needless to say that he was weak, but if he was strong, he would most likely have to rely on his eyes to exert force. Pupil had consumed a lot of energy yesterday. Although she was replenished by the Yin soul in the jade bracelet, it was hard to say how much she could recover overnight. From the looks of it, tomorrow was destined to be a bitter battle. I couldn't help him with the recovery of his eyes. In the following time, I made some golden light talismans and pure yang fire talismans to replenish the energy I had consumed in the past few days. The next morning, I hurried to the Metaphysics Association to welcome the last battle. Just like yesterday, the Nanyang Dao sect had sent out a middle-aged man who practiced Nanyang sorcery. However, this time, he had more tattoos on his body. The tattoos even covered his face. Moreover, he was wearing a black cloak. He called himself Black Clothes Zan. In Thai, Zan meant magician, and white cloaks and black cloaks represented the difference between the righteous and evil sections. It was hard to imagine that the mysterious and evil old man in the white cloak yesterday was the righteous Zan. If the righteous Zan was like that, what would the black-cloaked Zan do today? I couldn't help but feel nervous. As soon as I stepped forward, I held the square sky fan in my hand. I wanted to use it first. However, this Zan was more polite than the white-cloaked Zan yesterday. He clasped his hands in front of his chest to greet me. Then, he used his broken Chinese to introduce himself. Allah Di, the disciple of the Thai royal palace's master Sadragyapa. I didn't know anything about the royal palace or Sadragyapa. After greeting him, I took out the Tao energy and took out the square sky fan. I wanted to take action first. When the wild grass appeared, the black-robed Azanaladi's expression turned solemn. He immediately took out a strange golden doll the size of a palm from his loose black robe and casually threw it on the ground. At first, I didn't know what it was. However, when the gold-plated baby landed on the ground, a dark shadow of a child appeared in front of him. He jumped and walked toward me. When I saw the child, I was startled. It wasn't because of the thick Yin energy around the ghost child. It was because I could feel Tong Tong's aura on the ghost child. Could it be that this ghost child was also a ghost infant? I didn't have time to think. I asked Tong Tong, "What's going on?" Tong Tong was paying attention to the situation in the arena. This ghost child isn't a natural ghost child. He's different from her. I calmed down a little. The situation wasn't clear yet, so I didn't hurry to call Tong Tong. I controlled the wild grass shadow to bind the ghost child. As my cultivation level had improved and stabilized, the wild grass phantom in the square sky fan had turned into a large rattan that was more than 10 feet long. When it waved, it looked like a bunch of whip shadows with a terrifying aura directly attacking the ghost child. It seemed that the ghost child was no match for the wild grass shadows at all. However, when the wild grass shadows approached him, the ghost child just grasped them in his hand casually. Then, he threw them aside and continued to move forward while bouncing. I was shocked again. The ghost child, who was at the Ghost King realm, was stopped for a while by the wild grass shadow. However, the ghost child couldn't resist it at all. At this moment, Azan Aladi spoke in broken Chinese again. Your magic tool isn't a match for my Kumanthong. We both raise Kumanthangs. If I'm not wrong, your Kumanthong is also at the three-spirit realm. How about we use our Kumanthangs to fight? Kumanthong? Three-spirit realm? I was a little confused. I knew about Kumanthongs. They were something similar to ghosts in Nanyang witchcraft. The ghost child in front of me should be one of them. However, he said that I also raised Kumanthongs. What's going on? After thinking for a while, I understood that he had mistaken Tong Tong for a Kumanthong. Although Tong Tong said that she was different from the ghost child, there must be something similar between them. I hesitated for a while but didn't let Tong Tong come out. This man had observed Tong Tong for several days. He was confident that he could defeat Tong Tong. That was why he had said it so casually. Tong Tong wasn't in her best condition yet. It was hard to say if she could defeat the Kumanthong. To ensure our victory today, I had to exhaust the Kumanthong's power. After making up my mind, I didn't answer him. Instead, I used the golden light spell. It turned into a golden halo that shielded me and the ghost child. Then, I used the Pure Yang spell to draw out the Pure Yang Karma Fire to attack the Kumanthong. This was the strongest spell I had against ghosts and spirit. It had worked wonders against the people from the ghost nurturing sect and the tame headmaster. Strangely, when the Pure Yang Karma Fire floated in front of Kumanthong, the Kumanthong didn't move. He gently blew at the Pure Yang Karma Fire, making the flame flicker and almost extinguish. I was shocked. The Pure Yang Karma Fire could restrain ghosts. Even the ghosts in the Ghost King realm could only use their Yin energy to slowly wear down the Pure Yang power in the flame. They didn't dare to face it head-on. However, the Kumanthong had such power with just a casual blow. It was unbelievable. Before I could react, Kumanthong actually extended his hands and held the Pure Yang Hellfire in his hand. A black aura rose from his hands and enveloped the flame. Not long after, the Pure Yang Hellfire was completely extinguished. After doing all that, Kumanthong skipped towards me again. He only stopped in front of the halo formed by the golden light incantation. He extended his hand and stuffed it into the golden halo. It seemed the golden light spell couldn't stop him for long. Now I finally understood why I felt that the Kumanthong was similar to Tong Tong. Although the ghost child was also a Yin soul, he had 3 souls just like Tong Tong. That was why he wasn't afraid of the pure Yang energy. It seemed that I couldn't treat him as an otherworldly item. Using these 2 divine spells alone wouldn't work. After thinking for a while, I took out the Yin and Yang Yama brush that Zhang Kanwen had lent me. After receiving the Tao energy, the Yin and Yang energy formed a giant yin-yang fish that spiraled toward the ghost child. Seeing the yin-yang fish, the Kumanthong stopped and stood still. He let the yin-yang fish approach him. Then, he suddenly opened his mouth and revealed his sharp teeth. Then, he bit the yin-yang fish. At first, the Kumanthong looked like a child and looked cute. However, when he opened his mouth, his ferocious appearance made people shiver. When he bit down, a part of the yin-yang fish pattern disappeared. However, the Kumanthong didn't have it easy either. He let out a shrill scream. The yin and yang energy flowed in the yin-yang fish. When the Kumanthong bit down, he was attacked by the yin and yang energy. Of course, he felt pain. However, to my surprise, the pain stimulated his ferocity. Not only did he not stop, but he also bit more resolutely. After a few bites, almost half of the yin-yang fish pattern had been bitten off. It looked broken. I smiled wryly. In the end, I was only in the acupuncture realm. I wasn't the Kumanthong's match. I had given up on fighting the Kumanthong alone and was ready to summon Tong Tong. However, before I did, I had to make one last effort to consume as much energy as possible. So, I used the Tao energy again and formed a new yin-yang fish. To increase its power, I also used the dark green energy to strengthen the yin-yang fish. Then, I spiraled toward the Kumanthong. When the new Inyang fish reached the common thong had bitten off the previous one. Its mouth didn't stop and immediately bit at the second Inyang fish. I thought that the Inyang fish would only be able to consume it for a moment, but I didn't expect the common thong to suddenly freeze after biting it. A large amount of black liquid flowed out of its mouth, and its entire body trembled. A few seconds later, the common thong prostrated on the ground. It didn't dare move the Inyang fish that was approaching it. Before I could react, the black-clothed Asanalati, who had been standing calmly at the side, had a drastic change in expression. He quickly walked to where the Inyang fish was. After looking at it for a while, he also put his palms together and knelt on the ground, muttering something. This sudden turn of events caused everyone in the arena to look at each other in dismay. After a few minutes, the black-clothed Asan finally carefully stood up from the ground. After taking another glance at the Inyang fish, he suddenly said, "My lord has the power of 9 spirits. Aladi is not your match. I admit defeat for this match." Chapter 211. After Aladi walked down, the people from the Nanyang Taoist faction surrounded him. Their expressions were angry as they loudly said something. I didn't need to listen to know that they were condemning Aladi for giving up on the competition. It was a pity that Aladi didn't pay attention to these people. Instead, he had a strange smile on his face as he stood there. His eyes were still looking at me, giving me goosebumps. At that moment, President Su, Chen Shuha, and the others walked over with surprised expressions and announced the result of the exchange. Afterwards, Chen Shuha walked over and said to the leader of the Nanyang Taoist faction, Lin Zhong, "Now that the competition has ended, according to the previous bet, your ghost-raising sex Liang Kaixiong matter will no longer be pursued. Also, I have a small gift for you." After saying that, he took out a book titled Introduction to Metaphysics, and handed it over to Lin Zhong. Previously, when this exchange was decided, the people from the Nanyang Taoist faction had added a condition. They said that if they won, they would give us their Taoist books. Now that we were the ones who won, Chen Shuha had already prepared this kind of common printed material to mock them. Lin Zhong naturally understood Chen Shuha's intentions. After remaining silent for a while with a dark expression, he turned around and left with his group. After they left, the people from the Guangdong branch could no longer suppress the excitement in their hearts and cheered. Zhang Kanwan and a few other youngsters rushed over and surrounded me, loudly congratulating me. President Su, Chen Shuha, and the other older people also stood to the side and smiled at me. After Zhang Kanwan and the others calmed down, Chen Shuha walked in front of me and said emotionally, "When you obtained the title of Young Phoenix, I only thought that you were a talented youngster. But now, it seems that you are worthy of the title of Young Phoenix. With your pressure points, you were able to defeat the 4 great glorious knowledge experts of the Nanyang Taoist faction. This kind of glory is enough for you to be called the number 1 of the younger generation in the metaphysics world. In the future, it wouldn't be impossible to remove the words younger generation from the world." I could understand his agitation, but this evaluation was a bit too high. There were many crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the world of metaphysics, especially those hidden families and sections I knew of: the geniuses of the Corpse sect, the Han family, and the Zhang family. There were many that I didn't know of. I really didn't dare to be called number 1. I smirked but didn't reply. Chen Shuha didn't say much. He just invited President Su and the others to a celebratory party. We should get drunk. I thought he would ask us to come too, but he said we young people would not be happy in the company of old men, so he left us to celebrate on our own. Then, he pulled President Su and the others and left. Zhang Kanwan and Zhang Wenfei, the 2 brothers, dragged me to a nearby restaurant and celebrated. I returned to the hotel in a drunken state after midnight. I fell asleep on my bed and didn't wake up until the sun was high up in the sky. After waking up, I circulated my Dao Qi, and the alcohol was gone. However, I wasn't in a hurry to get up. Instead, I lay there lazily and thought about the black-cloved Azan. From how the Kumanthong had bitten off the first Inyang fish, I could see that they weren't afraid of the Inyang fish. Moreover, the second Inyang fish had an extra dark green energy compared to the first one. It was obvious that the black-cloved Azan had knelt down and admitted defeat because of the dark green energy. I vaguely remembered that he had said something about the power of the 9 spirits. Did the black-cloved Azan know what the dark green energy was? According to my previous speculation, the dark green energy was the residual power of the Tao Qi, but I wasn't sure. Moreover, since the black-cloved Azan knew this power, had he come into contact with it? I suddenly thought of a possibility. The dark green energy came from the Tai Sui. Had the black-cloved Azan come into contact with another Tai Sui? During the trip to the corpse sect, I had a vague feeling that the Tai Sui was the corpse of the Star of Time, and there were only 4 stars of time. If the giant corpse of the corpse sect was really the Tai Sui, then I had already seen 2 Tai Sui, and there were still 2 I hadn't seen yet. If I could find the third Tai Sui through the black-cloved Azan, it would be the best. I couldn't cultivate the dark green energy, so I could only absorb it from the black bead. Most of the black bead's energy was used to isolate the aura of the true dragon vein. I wouldn't be able to come into contact with the giant corpse of the corpse sect in a short time. If I could find the third Tai Sui, maybe I could get another black bead that I could absorb. The people from the Nanyang Dao wouldn't leave so soon. I thought about it and immediately called Wang Yongjun. I wanted him to help me find out where the people from the Nanyang Dao were staying. However, the call didn't go through. I guessed that Wang Yongjun was busy. I thought for a while, then called Dai Nanzhou. He was Wang Yongjun's assistant, so I could ask him to take care of this matter. It turned out that Dai Nanzhou was very efficient. In the afternoon, he called me back. Not only did he tell me the hotel where the people from the Nanyang Dao were staying, but he also told me something else. He told me that when he went to the Four Seasons Hotel to check the room number of the Nanyang Dao people, he met Suziu. When I heard the name, I didn't remember. After a few seconds, I remembered what had happened that year. Suziu, how are you doing now? Dai Nanzhou hesitated for a while, then said, Suziu doesn't seem to be doing well. When I met him today, he looked very strange. His face seemed to have a dark aura. Moreover, when I met him, I saw him enter the room of the black-clothed Azan of the Nanyang Dao group. I was surprised. How did Suziu get involved with the people from the Nanyang Dao group? In recent years, I've heard news about Suziu on and off. She's now a very famous female celebrity. In the entertainment circle, there are often rumors of people going to Southeast Asia to visit various eminent monks. Could it be that Suziu is in the same situation? It was understandable, but Dai Nanzhou said that Suziu's face seemed to have a layer of dark energy. This was even stranger. I had seen Suziu's glabella on the TV, but I couldn't see it clearly through the TV screen, so I didn't pay much attention to it. However, Dai Nanzhou was just an ordinary person. If he could see something strange on Suziu's face, things wouldn't be that simple. While I was pondering, Dai Nanzhou hurriedly asked, No matter what, we're old classmates. Do you want to check on her? After hesitating for a while, I nodded and agreed. Suziu seemed to have some connection with the black-clothed Azan, and I also needed to contact him. It wouldn't be a bad idea to check on Suziu first. After I agreed, Dai Nanzhou immediately told me Suziu's address. I couldn't help but laugh. This fellow was really warm-hearted. He had already prepared everything. Suziu was a celebrity, after all, and ordinary people couldn't meet her. However, Dai Nanzhou had used Wang Yongjun's connections to contact the CEO of an entertainment company in Hong Kong. He then arranged for someone to take us to the hotel where Suziu was staying. The moment I saw Suziu, I furrowed my brows. Dai Nanzhou wasn't wrong. Suziu had encountered a big problem. Her glabella was dark, and anyone with a bit of knowledge about geomancy could see that she didn't have long to live. I used my Tao energy to check on her soul. Then, I found out that her fate wasn't in danger, but that her 3 souls were unstable. The dark glabella was a sign that her life soul was unstable. If I wasn't wrong, Suziu only had half a month left to live. Moreover, her 3 souls were unstable, which caused her to be sick and her memory to deteriorate. She seemed to be in a trance. Logically speaking, her body should be very haggard, but the strange thing was that when I looked at her, I felt an indescribable attraction. I looked at her for a long time, but I didn't understand what was going on. But soon, I found a small gilded doll on her body, which reminded me of the Kumin Thong of Azan. Was it possible that Suziu's situation was because she had been supporting the Kumin Thong? At this time, Suziu's expression also changed. It was obvious that she recognized me and Dai Nanzhou. But strangely, Suziu pretended not to know us. With a cold face, she asked the assistant next to her to chase us out. Dai Nanzhou scolded Suziu with a gloomy face. I had a strange feeling in my heart. Suziu knew who I was, and logically speaking, she should be asking me for help. Why did she pretend not to know me and chase me out? Before I could figure it out, a figure suddenly walked in front of Dai Nanzhou and me. He said to me with a strange tone and a faint smile, "Little brother Zhou-yi, do you still remember me?" I looked up and saw a white-haired old man wearing sunglasses. His body was emitting Tao energy, and he seemed to be in the early stage of the acupoint sealing realm. I frowned, but before I could say anything, the old man took off his sunglasses and said with a smile, "You should recognize me now, right?" He was right. The moment he took off his sunglasses, I recognized him. This person was Professor Deng Meng, who had killed the child in Suziu's stomach. After so many years, this evil person from back then had actually appeared in front of me again. Before I could say anything, Deng Meng put his sunglasses back on and looked at me emotionally. "Back then, I thought that you were quite talented, but I didn't expect that after so many years, you still don't have much Tao energy. What a pity." Hearing his words, I felt a little strange. My current realm far surpassed his, and with the dark green energy concealing me, it was normal that he couldn't see through my cultivation. But I didn't expect him to think that my cultivation was too low. Chapter 212. Listening to Professor Deng's words and looking at his face as if he was in control of my life and death, I found it funny. At the same time, I couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Professor Deng had taught me the correct understanding of Qi and brought me to the Earth Master realm. From then until now, it had only been 3 or 4 years. Previously, I had been amazed by Yi Piampian's terrifying progress in 3 years. Now that I looked back at myself, I realized that I wasn't worse than Yi Piampian. No wonder Professor Deng thought that I was still in the dragon-seeking realm. Before I could speak, Dai Nanzhou spoke first. He pretended to point at Professor Deng and said sternly, "Don't mess around. Zhou-yi is now a member of the Shenzhen Metaphysics Association. If anything happens to him, the Shenzhen Metaphysics Association will never let you go." Shenzhen Metaphysics Society? Professor Deng sneered disdainfully. "The Metaphysics Society is a dirty place. They won't care if you live or die." Hearing his familiar tone, I remembered that Professor Deng had also held a position in the Metaphysics Society. Moreover, he had been the vice president. According to the Metaphysics Society's rules, the vice president was an honorary position, and his power had to be at least in the acupuncture realm. From then until now, Professor Deng's power hadn't increased at all. In the metaphysics world, increasing one's power was the most important thing to everyone. Professor Deng had refined a ghost and harmed people. His goal was obviously to increase his power. It was a ridiculous result. I interrupted Professor Deng. "I can hand over the ghost child, but we can't do it in public. Let's find a place first." Deng Meng was surprised by my cooperative attitude. He looked at me hesitantly and pointed at Suziu's room not far from us. He sneered. Let's go there. After listening to him, I sighed. It seemed Professor Deng hadn't been following Suziu in the dark all these years. He had been following her openly. It wasn't hard to imagine what kind of life Suziu had been living with such an old man. I nodded and called Dai Nanzhou. Then, we returned to Suziu's room with Professor Deng. Seeing us return with Professor Deng, Suziu's face turned gloomy. He sighed and sat down dejectedly. Professor Deng waved his hand and asked Suziu's assistant to leave. He closed the door and urged me again. I smiled at him and let Tong Tong come out from the jade bracelet. As soon as the pupil appeared, Professor Deng's eyes suddenly widened. He stared at the pupil with burning eyes and his face was full of fascination. After a long while, he muttered to himself, "It really is a heavenly fetus. It really is a heavenly fetus. It has grown so big in just a few years." As he spoke, Professor Deng reached out to grab Tong Tong, but when his hand stretched out halfway, he suddenly froze there. He suddenly cried out involuntarily, "No, why is this in chi? Why is it so thick?" Then, he abruptly retracted his outstretched hand. He looked at Tong Tong and asked me, "This heavenly embryo, what realm is it at now?" My Tao energy was covered by the dark green energy, so Professor Deng couldn't sense it. However, Tong Tong was different. Even if she didn't release the thick yin qi, it was enough to frighten people. As Professor Deng had reached the acupoint ceiling realm, of course, he could sense it. I smiled at him and said calmly, "A few days ago, she broke through to the Ghost King realm. I guess she's at the glorious knowledge realm among geomancy masters." "Ghost King?" Professor Deng exclaimed. He couldn't help but take half a step back. His face was frightened and envious. He looked at Tong Tong and then at me. After a long time, he finally spoke again. This time, his voice wasn't as calm as before. He sounded a little guilty. "In just a few years, she has grown from a little soul to the Ghost King realm. Even if she's just a heavenly fetus, her innate talent is really amazing. It's a waste for her to stay with you. Give her to me." I take back what I said. As long as you give her to me, I can let you go. I pulled a chair from the side and sat down. I looked at Professor Deng with interest. "She has the Ghost King cultivation base, and she listens to me. I don't understand why you dare to threaten me under such circumstances." Professor Deng looked at Tong Tong. Then, he turned to me and said coldly, "Ghosts and humans are different. Even if she has the Ghost King realm, so what? She doesn't know any spells or soul tools. How much of her power can she use? You want to rely on this ghost, but you've made a mistake. Kid, you can try." What he said wasn't wrong. The Ghost King realm was just a realm. It meant that Tong Tong's yin energy had reached this realm. However, yin energy alone wasn't enough. It was like a person who had Tao energy but didn't know any spells. He couldn't use his power at all. The Jinggue that Tong Tong and I had fought together was the same. Although he was at the Ghost King realm, he didn't know any spells. In the end, Tong Tong and I had worked together to defeat him. Tong Tong was different. She had been cultivating the divine techniques from the Death Scripture. With her heavenly yin energy, not only could she use her power, but she could also use her power beyond her normal level. I grinned. I didn't want to argue with Deng Mundo anymore, so I directly said, "Professor Deng, you used to refine small ghosts. Do you really think that a seeking dragon realm cultivator can control a ghost with the power of a Ghost King?" Deng Meng frowned and his voice became hoarse. "You? What do you mean?" I smiled and activated the dark green power. I didn't hide my Tao energy anymore. Ordinary people couldn't sense Tao energy, so Dai Nanzhou and Suziu didn't move. However, Deng Meng's eyes opened wide. His body seemed to be shivering as he shouted, "Impossible! How could it be?" I stood up from the chair and my smile turned cold. I said softly, I believe that after that incident, Professor Deng hasn't been in the Metaphysics Society anymore, right? If you're still in the Metaphysics Society, you should have heard of the name of the young phoenix. Young phoenix? Deng Meng naturally understood what that term meant. His face turned pale and his body shivered even more violently. As I walked forward, I continued to smile coldly. Professor Deng, I reckon that you don't pay much attention to the news. These few days, the Guangdong Metaphysics Society had a friendly competition with the Nanyang Taoists. The Nanyang Taoists were all at the glory of consciousness realm. I'm untalented, but I defeated 4 of them in a row. Deng Meng's face turned the color of a pig's liver, and he sat on the ground. At that moment, I walked in front of him and looked at him coldly. I bent down and said, Professor Deng, although you aren't in the Metaphysics Society and don't pay attention to the news, you should have heard of the saying, those who do evil will bring about their own destruction. From Professor Jiao's child to Su Ziyu and the child in her womb, you've done so many evil deeds. I wonder how much regret you have today? Professor Deng's pale face regained some color at this moment. He gritted his teeth, and his eyes instantly turned scarlet. He struggled to sit up straight and said in a hoarse voice, the metaphysics world has always been a place where the strong prey on the weak. I'm just unlucky this time to have met a genius like you. If it were someone else, I would have successfully obtained this heavenly fetus so long ago, and my strength would not have been reduced to this level. Those who do evil will bring about their own destruction. What is righteousness and what is unrighteousness? I shook my head. What is righteousness? What is unrighteousness? When you were refining little ghosts, you went to the graveyard, the mortuary, and even dug up graves to look for corpses. But you killed people and refined their souls. That is unrighteousness. When you asked me for the spirit, you directly controlled me and took it by force. You even killed me and took it away. That is unrighteousness. But you set up a trap and killed Su Ziyu's child. That is unrighteousness. After doing such a heartless thing, as long as you have the slightest bit of remorse, you could go into hiding, or forget about this matter and continue on with your life. However, you've been by Su Ziyu's side for so many years, and you've caused her to become like this. This is unrighteousness. As the saying goes, those who do evil are unrighteous. Let me ask you again. Do you have any regrets? Deng Meng's eyes were still red as he sneered. I only know the law of the jungle. If I had any regrets, would you have let me go today? I don't have any regrets. I stooped down and stared into his crimson eyes. I smiled, but it was an extremely cold smile. I squeezed the words out between my teeth. Chapter 213. After dealing with Deng Meng, I asked Dai Nanzhou to call Wang Yongjun. Since Wang Yongjun was able to build up such a large family fortune in Shenzhen, he was naturally well connected with both the legal and the underworld. After finding out what had happened, he quickly sent a few unfamiliar faces to help clean up the scene and leave with Deng Meng's body. Of course, before Deng Meng's body was taken away, I had taken everything from him. I checked Deng Meng's belongings and found that most of them were ghost host vessels. After checking, I found that those ghosts had ordinary power. They were useless to me. Thus, I released the imprisoned ghosts and chanted an incantation to release them from their suffering. Although I had released them, most of them had followed Deng Meng and done many evil things. They were entangled with karma. It was easy to go to the afterlife, but it was hard to reincarnate. After dealing with Deng Meng's case, I called Su Ziyu and asked her about her life these years. Su Ziyu didn't talk much. She seemed to be a little reluctant to talk to me. She sat there and lit a cigarette. Professor Deng came to her 2 years ago. Since then, except for one visit to my school, where he couldn't find me, he had been staying by her side, waiting for me to show up. 2 years ago was around 1.5 years after Deng Meng disappeared. During that time, he must have recovered from his wounds and found a way to deal with the white-clothed ghost in the jade bracelet. That was why he went to find me. If he had found me at that time, I wouldn't have been his opponent. Luckily, I wasn't in the school at that time, so he didn't have the chance to find me. Now that he has finally found me, my strength is already beyond his imagination. However, I still found it strange. If Deng Meng wanted to find me, he could have found many ways. Staying by Suziyu's side wasn't a good idea. I turned to look at the gold-plated baby next to Suziyu and vaguely got the answer. Suziyu's baby had died as soon as it was born. Since it had an innate Yin body, its soul also carried Yin energy. If it was refined into a ghost, it would be extraordinary. Considering Deng Meng's cultivation methods, it was possible that he had gone to find Suziyu because of this baby. However, I didn't know why this baby was made into a kumanthong. After a moment of hesitation, I also lit a cigarette and voiced out my doubts. Suziyu's calm face finally changed. She didn't bring the cigarette to her lips for a long time before she finally spoke. Back then, after I passed away, she couldn't let go of the knot in her heart. She didn't want to bury her child. Later on, she read about the kumanthong in Thailand on the internet. She was so happy that she brought the remains of her child to Thailand. She found an asin in a famous temple and made the child into a kumanthong. Since then, she has been taking care of the child. Kumanthong's dermic powers were extremely powerful, especially for kumanthong like Suziyu, who was refined from his own flesh and blood. His dermic powers were far stronger than ordinary kumanthongs. However, Suziyu wasn't someone from the metaphysics world. Kumanthong's dharma powers weren't displayed in battle, but in bringing her fortune and luck. After returning from Thailand, Suziyu calmed herself down and returned to society. Her luck suddenly improved, and she accidentally participated in a talent show. She immediately became famous and entered the entertainment circle. In the entertainment industry, it was very difficult for a newcomer to produce any works or become popular if there was no one to support them. However, Suziyu was different. She became popular when she participated in a talent show, and after signing a contract with a small entertainment company, she quickly got a job opportunity and settled down. Her talent and hard work were part of it, but most of it was because of the kumanthong. There had always been a saying that the fortune brat was a good omen, so it wasn't strange that the kumanthong had such an effect. However, in essence, the kumanthong's effect wasn't to bring Suziyu good luck. It was to change her aura and make people who saw her be attracted to her. Just like when I saw Suziyu today, I clearly sensed that there was something wrong with her body. There was dense Yin energy around her, but I still felt that she was very attractive. Over the years, Suziyu had relied on the changes brought about by the kumanthong to gain some fame in the entertainment circle. From the looks of it, the kumanthong really seemed to be something amazing. Unfortunately, there weren't so many things in the world that came without sowing. What the kumanthong brought to Suziyu wasn't just the rise of her career, but also the collapse of her body. When she joined the talent show, I sensed the Yin energy in her body through the television screen. After so many years of providing for the kumanthong, her bodily functions had regressed. Her skin was loose and she was dispirited. Even her lifespan had been greatly reduced. If it weren't for the kumanthong's support, Suziyu's current appearance would be unsightly. But even so, Suziyu wouldn't have fallen to this state. Her soul had been corroded by the Yin energy, and her 3 souls were all unstable. She only had less than half a month left to live. There had to be something else going on. After asking for more information, Suziyu told me that Deng Meng had found her and found that the fetus had been made into a kumanthong. He was enraged. For the past 2 years, he had been torturing Suziyu crazily and used her body to nurture the souls of those little ghosts. Suziyu's voice was calm, as if she was talking about something normal. However, I knew what kind of person Deng Meng was. It was hard to imagine what kind of torture Suziyu had gone through behind his seemingly calm word. After finding the reason, I didn't ask more and turned to find a way to solve the problem in Suziyu's body. The problem with her soul was really tricky. Even I didn't have a way to cure it completely. After thinking for a while, I asked Tong Tong to take out most of the yin energy in Suziyu's soul. Then, I used several talismans to temporarily stabilize her soul. This method didn't solve the root of the problem, but it could help her prolong her lifespan to around half a year. However, there was a way to cure the root of the problem. Suziyu had to practice Taoist techniques herself. When yin energy entered the soul, there were only two ways to get rid of it. First, she could control the yin energy in the soul and use it for her own use. Second, she could use her own Taoist energy to nurture it and gradually wear it down. After thinking for a while, I told Suziyu about the situation and told her that she had to quit the entertainment circle. She had to give up her career and cultivate. Moreover, there were two places she could choose to cultivate. The first was the ghost-raising sect of the Hong Kong Taoist school. Recently, I hadn't gotten along with the ghost-raising sect. That was why I knew the cultivation method of the ghost-raising sect. The ghost-raising sect raised yin souls, and their souls had to be strong enough to control them. Moreover, the cultivation method of the ghost-raising sect leaned toward the evil side, which was suitable for Suziyu's current condition. The second was the orthodox Taoist school, which was the most neutral and peaceful Taoist school in the world. After practicing it, it was very easy to wear down the yin energy in the soul. The only drawback was that the orthodox Taoist school's cultivation method was very difficult. It was hard to say if she could make any progress in half a year. As for the Taoist school, it wasn't that I didn't consider it, but it was too difficult to get started in Taoist studies. It took me several years to get started in Taoist studies, and Suziyu obviously didn't have that much time. Of course, it wasn't that it was easy to get into either the ghost-raising sect or the orthodox school. However, Suziyu was a famous celebrity, so it was much easier for her to convert to the Taoist school than ordinary people. It shouldn't be a problem. After listening to my story, Suziyu was stunned for a while. Then, she suddenly asked, "The sect you practice should be in the mainland, right?" I was surprised, but I nodded. "I guess it's in the mainland, but after converting, I've been living a peaceful life. Whether it's the mainland or Hong Kong, there's no difference." In fact, the orthodox school was very different from the evil Taoist school like the ghost-raising sect. However, I didn't think it was a serious matter, so I didn't mention it. Chapter 214. After making a choice, it meant that the matter was settled. Suziyu stubbed out the cigarette butt in her hand and sat up. "Next, I need to deal with my own affairs and contact my family. It will take about half a month. By then, the result of contacting the Jingyi school should be out." I nodded and gave her 2 mind-calming and soul-calming talismans. Then, I stood up to bid farewell. However, before I left, I suddenly remembered about Azan. I stopped and asked her, "Why do you have a relationship with him?" Suziyu said, "Azan was the one who made her come in Thong back then. She heard from other believers that Azan had come to Shenzhen, so she came to visit him." After saying that, she kept silent for a while. "I wanted to ask Master Azan to kill Deng Meng, but I don't think there's a need for that now." Her voice was as calm as before, but the calmer she was, the more she couldn't hide her deep-rooted hatred for Deng Meng. I sighed and didn't say anything else. I left with Dai Nanzhou. After saying goodbye to Suziyu, I asked Dai Nanzhou to go back alone while I went to Azan's room. The people of the Nanyang Taoist sect must hate me to the bone. But with their strength, even if they had evil intentions, it was impossible for them to make me stay. So, I didn't think too much about it and went to Azan's room. Today, I came with a friendly attitude. According to the rules of the metaphysics world, I purposely dispersed the dark green energy and released my cultivation base. After standing at the door for a few seconds, I reached out and knocked on the door. Soon the door opened. Aizen was standing at the door. He seemed to know that I was coming. He didn't look surprised at all. Instead, he asked in broken Chinese with a respectful smile, "You're here?" Looking at the black-robed Tai with tattoos all over his body, I had a strange feeling. It was as if he could see through everything about me. After a moment of absent-mindedness, I cupped my hands at him. I didn't say anything and walked in. Aizen invited me to sit in the tea room outside the suite. After serving me tea, he took a sip and sighed. China's tea ceremony is very good. When I was in Thailand, my master brewed tea for me every day. He didn't let me drink iced tea, only hot tea. He told me stories about China's tea ceremony. I've admired China since I was young. I imitated him and picked up a teacup that was as thin as a cicada's wing. After drinking a cup, I wanted to respond to him. However, I didn't understand much about the tea ceremony. I could only smile wryly and say, "In Chinese people's minds, everything has a Tao. Our cultivation is to seek the Tao, and tasting tea is also to seek the Tao. Through analogy, it might be beneficial for our cultivation." Aizen seemed like I had met a close friend. His words, and his eyes glowed. And hurriedly, he nodded. Tao that. Looking at his expression, I felt even weirder. In the previous exchange competition, no matter if it was the Hong Kong Ghost Nurturing Sect or the Tame Headmaster, they all practiced Taoist techniques from the Central Plains. They were also overseas Chinese, but all of them were hostile to the mainland's Taoist sections. On the contrary, this Thai man, Aizen, seemed to admire the Central Plains culture. After sipping a few more cups of tea, Aizen took the initiative to mention the dark green power. "Lord, since you came to visit today, you must have come for the power of the 9 spirits, right?" I nodded. Although the way he addressed it was different, according to the situation that day, the power of the 9 spirits that he mentioned was the dark green power. "Lord, you are the Holy Son and have already obtained the recognition of the power of the 9 spirits. Aizen is slow-witted and has yet to obtain the recognition of the power of the 9 spirits. If Lord has any questions, I'm afraid that I won't be able to answer," Aizen said respectfully. Hearing him address me as Lord, I felt awkward. I couldn't help but ask, "Why do you call me Lord? What does Holy Son mean?" Aizen smiled. "In our Grand King's palace, if you can obtain the recognition of the power of the 9 spirits, you are the Holy Son. The Holy Son's status is very high, so we naturally have to address you as Lord." After hearing his words, I was even more certain that the Grand King's palace was related to the Tai Sui. After pondering for a while, I asked, "How many Holy Sons do you have now?" Aizen shook his head. "My teacher used to be the Holy Son. Ever since he became Shiragami, the Grand King's palace didn't have another Holy Son. If Lord comes to our Grand King's palace to observe the power of the 9 spirits, we will definitely welcome you as a Holy Son." His words confused me. I couldn't help but ask, "I'm not a member of the Grand King's palace. How can I observe the power of the 9 spirit?" Aizen continued to nod. "It doesn't matter if you're a member of the Grand King's palace or not. What's important is the recognition of the power of the 9 spirits. No matter who Lord is, you will always be respected by the Grand King's palace. Observing the power of the 9 spirits is your right." Waves surged in my heart. Before coming here, I had been thinking of ways to find the Tai Sui. I had never expected Aizen to say that. If his words represented the attitude of the Grand King's palace, I would have to find some time to go to Thailand to find the Tai Sui. Moreover, according to what he said, the Holy Son was someone who had the power of the 9 spirit. In that case, the people of the Grand King's palace had a tradition of obtaining the power of the Tai Sui. This would definitely help me increase my dark green power. After making up my mind, I asked for the detailed address of the Grand King's palace, as well as how to contact him when I got there. Aizen looked delighted and didn't seem to be faking it. Not only did he answer all my questions, but he also told me to go as soon as possible. His teacher would be very happy to see me. It was obvious that I couldn't go as soon as possible. Although Aizen's enthusiasm didn't seem fake, it was a foreign country after all. It was hard to say what I would encounter. Moreover, I had already reached the 9 apertures acupuncture realm. I would have to wait until I reached the glory of consciousness realm at the earliest. At that time, I would be able to escape even if I were to face the celestial master. From Aizen's cultivation base, the teacher he had mentioned, Shirapana, was at the celestial master realm. After pondering for a while, I told him a general date. Next year. After making an appointment, I asked him about the 3 spirits realm he had mentioned the other day. I also asked him about the relationship between the 3 spirits and the power of the 9 spirit. Aizen told me, 1 spirit to 9 spirits is the division of Kumanthong and Aizen's cultivation base. However, the 9 spirits is a cultivation base that only gods can have. Ordinary people can't reach it. That's why the power of the 9 spirits is also the power of God. I was startled. His Kumanthong and Pupilu had the power of the Ghost King, which was equivalent to the glory of consciousness in metaphysics. This was only the 3 spirits realm? Then, the 4 spirits was the celestial master's cultivation base. But what were the realms of the 5 spirits and the 6 spirits? Moreover, he had said that the 9 spirits were gods. So, Tai Sui's power was much higher than the celestial master's? Although the death scripture recorded a lot of things and could even be called an encyclopedia, it only recorded the basic content. When it came to cultivation, the higher the realm, the fewer things were recorded. When it came to the celestial master realm, there were only a few sentences. As for the higher realms, there was no mention of them. I seized the chance to ask Aizen about the cultivation base of the 5 spirits and 6 spirits realms. However, Aizen waved his hand and said with a matter-of-fact face, "I can't talk about it if my realm isn't high enough." I felt discouraged. After drinking afternoon tea and asking questions, I got up and left around dusk. Before I left, Aizen gave me a bronze 3-faced Buddha statue the size of a finger. He told me that it was a keepsake from the royal palace and that he wanted to give it to me as a souvenir. On the way back to my hotel, I received a call from Zhang Wenfei. He told me that he and his senior brother, Zhang Canwen, were going back to Meizhou in advance tonight. After the exchange competition, the members of the Guangdong branch had agreed to return to their hometown tomorrow after the meeting. Why did Zhang Wenfei and the rest want to return early? Just as I was about to ask, Zhang Wenfei seemed to be in a hurry and hung up the phone. I reckoned that he had encountered something urgent. I wanted to call back and ask, but after thinking about it, I put down the phone. With my relationship with Zhang Wenfei, if he really encountered something difficult, he would definitely look for me for help. I reckoned that it was just a matter of urgency. I might as well not waste his time and call him again tomorrow or the day after. After Zhang Wenfei and his senior brother left, there weren't many people in the Guangdong branch that were close to me. To avoid trouble, I didn't attend the farewell party on the second day. Instead, I stayed in the hotel to cultivate in peace. I had just stabilized my pressure point 9 apertures realm, so it would be difficult for me to increase it in a short period of time. However, the completion of the 10 apertures realm would arrive soon. Right now, I needed to start making preparations to raise my glory of knowledge realm. According to the metaphysics world, the glory of knowledge realm was to pluck the power of the stars in the sky and absorb it into one's body to reach this realm. It was rumored that in ancient times, when almighty people reached this realm, they would reach out and pluck the stars out of thin air to obtain the power of the stars in the sky. Of course, this was just a saying. It sounded incredible, but in reality, there were almost no rumors of plucking stars. In reality, almost all feng shui masters wanted to advance to the glory of knowledge realm, and the only way was to obtain obsidian. There were a total of 7 stars in the sky. The sun and the moon were the rulers, so there was no news of obsidian descending. Therefore, only the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth were left for feng shui masters to use. It was rumored that obsidian was obtained from meteorites. Of course, not all meteorites were obsidian. Only an extremely small portion of meteorites might contain a small piece of obsidian. This was also the reason why Taoists, monks, and feng shui masters loved to study meteorites since ancient times. In modern times, especially after the establishment of the Metaphysics Society, meteorites were mostly discovered and collected by the country at the first instance. Then, they were handed over to the Metaphysics Society for use. Therefore, after reaching the peak of pressure point perfection, some feng shui masters who contributed or had talent would receive obsidian from the Metaphysics Society. However, there were 2 problems in the middle. First, obsidian was divided into 5 elements. Feng shui masters also had 5 elements. They had to find the most suitable obsidian for themselves in order to increase their strength as much as possible. Because obsidian was too rare, it was difficult for the Metaphysics Society to fulfill this condition. The second problem was more important. The advancement of a feng shui master to the glory of knowledge realm wasn't constant. In simple terms, a small piece of obsidian or a large piece of obsidian could allow a feng shui master to advance. Let's not talk about success or failure for now. After a successful advancement, the amount of obsidian used would have a huge impact on one's strength. It was impossible for the Metaphysics Society to provide obsidian without limit. In this case, to ensure that one could advance and not be affected after the advancement, one could only think of a way. Of course, I wouldn't put my hopes on the obsidian given by the Metaphysics Society. I was thinking about the inscription I saw in the Fire God Temple. Chapter 2:15. Although I had a goal, there were still many problems. When I first came to Fire God Temple, I couldn't enter the door. And even if I did enter, I didn't know if I could get the fire obsidian or if I could come out alive. It was said that risk and opportunity coexisted, but the risk in Fire God Temple was too great. It was hard to say if it was worth the risk. But then again, I had already told Yi Piampian about Fire God Temple. When I left the capital, the people from the Metaphysics Association had already left for Fire God Temple. With their power, they might be able to solve the secret of Fire God Temple. At that time, with my contribution and Old Man Li's favor, I might be able to get enough fire obsidian for my use. That was only the first problem. Another problem was that the fire obsidian might not be suitable for me. When a feng shui master reached the complete acupoint ceiling realm, the 10 acupoints in the heaven meridian would be full. At that time, through a special detection artifact, the feng shui master's 5 elements would appear. There were 5 stars in the sky and 5 elements in humans. The essence of metaphysics was similar to Confucianism's unity of man and nature. Especially in the glory of knowledge realm, when using the light obsidian to obtain star power, one had to use the light obsidian that was compatible with one's 5-star origin. So, even if I got the fire obsidian, I could only use it when my 5-star origin was of the fire attribute. After careful consideration, I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Every step in metaphysics was extremely difficult. There was no shortcut. I could only be prepared to accept the difficulties. The only good thing was that there was still some time between the 9 acupoints ceiling realm and the 10 acupoints ceiling realm. At least, I could relax during this time and not think about glory of knowledge. Everything would have to wait until the 10 acupoints ceiling realm was completed. In the next few days I had some free time. I called Yi Piampian and the Fatty, but I couldn't get through to either of them. Yi Piampian was most likely at Fire God Temple, and she was with the people from the Metaphysics Association. I didn't have anything to worry about. However, things were different with Fatty. I had planned to go to Fatty's sect in Kaifeng to see how things were going when I returned home for the new year. However, the Liu family had come knocking on my door. Too many things had happened, so I had to put the matter aside. Although I didn't look for him, I had a feeling that even if I went, I wouldn't be able to find him. Fatty has my contact information, and when I met Fatty's father, I told him my address in Shenzhen. If the father and son were to successfully leave the Fire God Temple, they would definitely contact me. As I thought about it, I felt a little down. I could only pray for the Fatty in my heart, hoping that he would be blessed. Then, I called Zhang Wenfei. I wanted to ask him why they were in such a hurry to return to their hometown. However, I couldn't get through to him. We hadn't known each other for a long time, but Zhang Wenfei was definitely a friend of mine. He had left in a hurry, and I couldn't get through to him. I couldn't help but feel worried. After hanging up, I suddenly remembered that Zhang Wenfei had told me that his teacher, Zhao Dingwu, had invited me to Meizhou when I had time. He said that he wanted to talk to me about something. It just so happened that I had some free time in the next few days. I would take this chance to go to Meizhou and see Zhang Wenfei's situation. After making up my mind, I contacted Wang Yongjun. I wanted to tell him that I would be away for a few days. However, Wang Yongjun told me that he needed to find a location for a new factory and wanted to trouble me to check on its geomancy. Ever since I had received his salary, I had been in a state of unemployment. It wasn't easy for me to find an opportunity to do something. Of course, I agreed and pushed the matter of going to Meizhou to the back of my mind. In the next 3 days, I followed Wang Yongjun to visit a few locations. After a while, I found 2 places with good geomancy. One was the heavenly sea comes out of the stable. Saturn was like a stable, where the horses came out of the flat ground. The heavenly horses would gather in groups, and they wouldn't be taken care of. The stars would gather together, and the owner would be very rich. Moreover, it was a rapid geomancy. The second was the red-crowned crane hanging down pecking. The earth was heavy, but the fire was light. The fire wasn't obvious, so it stopped at being rich. It was a rich and slightly noble geomancy. After thinking for a while, I chose the second red-crowned crane hanging down pecking as the location to build the factory. Although the heavenly sea comes out of the stable was better, Wang Yongjun was a merchant. A rich and noble geomancy wasn't a good thing for him. Moreover, he had a lot of assets and his business had reached a stable stage. A rapid geomancy wasn't suitable for him. On the contrary, the second red-crowned crane hanging down pecking was stable, and it was the most suitable for him. After confirming, I told him the principles in between. After Wang Yongjun listened to me, he was silent for a while. Then, he sighed and said, "Brother Zhou, although I'm a few years older than you, my state of mind is much worse than yours. To be honest, when I heard about the first rich and noble geomancy, I couldn't help but feel a bit greedy. After you explained the reason, I finally understood. You're right. For me, stability is the most suitable. Thinking about the rich and noble geomancy will only bring trouble to myself. Today I've learned my lesson. Our factory will be located at the place where the red-crowned crane hanging down pecking." After he finished speaking, I waved my hand and smiled. It wasn't that I was being modest. Anyone who heard about the rich and noble geomancy would feel greedy. Not to mention, Wang Yongjun was still confused by the situation. It was already hard for him to not be affected by greed. If I were to put myself in his shoes, I'm not sure if I could make the same open-minded choice as him. After finishing this, Wang Yongjun gave me a check for 1 million renminbi. He said that it was for your hard work. When I first accepted the job, Wang Yongjun said that the annual salary would be calculated separately. Every time I worked, I would get a bonus. At this time, I didn't refuse and directly accepted it. Then, I asked Wang Yongjun about his recent plans. After learning that there wouldn't be anything else for the time being, I told him about going to Meizhou. Although I was hired by him, Wang Yongjun never asked about my whereabouts. Of course, he wouldn't say anything. Since Meizhou wasn't too far from Shenzhen, he directly asked his driver, Wang Kuan, to take me there. He said that he had a lot of business dealings there. Wang Kuan had also stayed there before, so he was more familiar with the place. It was more convenient to have someone pick me up, so I didn't refuse. With Wang Kuan on my feet, we set off to Meizhou. We set off at noon and arrived at Meizhou City around 5 p.m. We first found a hotel to stay in before driving to Meizhou's metaphysics branch. Before coming here, I had already asked Yang Kaichen for the specific address of the Meizhou branch. At this time, I didn't need to ask around. I quickly reached the place. Meizhou City was much smaller than Shenzhen, but the Meizhou branch wasn't any worse than the Shenzhen branch. It was also an entire building, but it was different from the modern style of Shenzhen. The Meizhou branch's building had an antique style. Aside from the fact that the building was too tall, the rest of the building was arranged in the style of ancient China. It looked very pleasing to the eye. However, when I stood at the door, I stopped. I didn't directly enter. It wasn't because someone was stopping me. It was because there were several white banners hanging on the main entrance of the Meizhou branch. On the two sides of the door, there were also funeral couplets and wreaths. From the looks of it, it seemed that there was a funeral going on. I had a bad premonition. After entering, I saw a mourning hall in the lobby. In the middle of the mourning hall there was a huge black and white photo. It was Grandpa Zhao Dingwu's photo. No wonder Zhang Wenfei and his fellow disciple had rushed back. It turned out that Grandpa Zhao had passed away. Although I hadn't had much contact with Grandpa Zhao, whether it was the stories I had heard about his life or the warning he had given me, it was enough to make me respect him. There were many people in the hall paying their respects to Grandpa Zhao. When I walked to the front of the mourning hall, someone handed me 3 sticks of incense. I took them and lit them. I respectfully bowed to Grandpa Zhao's portrait 3 times. Then, I grabbed some paper money from the short table and burned them. After that, I stood up and left the mourning hall. Although I was also grieving, funerals and condolences had proper etiquette. I couldn't be rude. However, after I left the mourning hall, I had some doubts. According to etiquette, the filial son, who wore mourning clothes in front of the mourning hall, should be the deceased's eldest son or grandson. I had heard from Zhang Wenfei that Grandpa Zhao Dingwu didn't have any children. He had treated the 2 of them as his own. Thus, the filial son here should be Zhang Kanwen. However, it was strange that the one who had offered me the incense was a kid around 17 or 18 years old. I couldn't help but feel suspicious. I pulled a young man and asked him, "Fellow Taoist, is the filial son in the mourning hall Grandpa Zhao's son?" After hearing my question, the young man looked at me strangely. Then, he answered, "Of course not. Zhao Dingwu didn't have any children. That's Vice President Zhang's youngest son. He's just playing the role of a filial son." Then, the young man seemed to be afraid of something. He didn't want to talk more. He waved his hand and left. Seeing his strange behavior, I was also puzzled. I didn't ask anyone else but looked around. However, I didn't see Zhang Wenfei or Zhang Kanwen. Zhang Wenfei and his fellow disciple hadn't appeared in Grandpa Zhao's mourning hall. No matter what, it didn't make sense. I was even more puzzled. I found a chance to talk to a middle-aged man who had just come out of the mourning hall. After talking to him, I discreetly asked him about Grandpa Zhao's death. I just wanted to ask him a random question as an excuse to talk to him. However, I didn't expect that the man would sigh and say, "I heard it was a disaster that destroyed his entire family. I don't know who Uncle Zhao had offended." Sigh. Chapter 216. It took me a long time to recover from this sudden grievous news. I didn't have the time to think about whether or not there was anything strange about this matter. I directly pulled this person over and asked, since it was a massacre, did Zhang Kanwen and Zhang Wenfei also meet with misfortune? The person was surprised. Then, he shook his head. You misunderstood. Uncle Zhao had a younger brother and 2 nephews. They usually lived together, but they were all killed this time. As for Uncle Zhao's 2 outstanding disciples, one was at the Metaphysics Union in the capital, and the other had left to travel a few days ago. I don't think they were involved. I heaved a sigh of relief. However, I was still a little suspicious. At the beginning of the exchange competition, Zhang Canwen had returned to Guangdong. And, a few days ago, the 2 of them had rushed to Meizhou through the night. Did the people here not know about this? After sorting out my thoughts, I asked this person, do you know the secret behind Grandpa Zhao's death? Or, have you heard any rumors? After hearing my question, the person shook his head. I don't know anything. Then, he hurriedly left. Whether it was the young man from before or the middle-aged man, when they talked about this matter, their expressions became strange. Although they didn't say anything, their expressions proved that there was a secret behind this matter. Since I was at the Meizhou branch, I guessed that I wouldn't get any results even if I continued to ask. I stood up and left. After meeting up with Wang Kuan outside, I called a taxi to return to the hotel. I asked Wang Kuan to drive the car and stay here to observe the movements of the Meizhou branch. A few days ago, during the exchange competition, I had used up a lot of the talismans I had on hand. After returning to the hotel, I didn't dare to waste any more time. I worked overnight to make enough talismans. Then, I used the True Dragon's vein in the jade bracelet to replenish my Tao energy. After the sun rose the next day, I hurried back to the Meizhou branch. Halfway there, Wang Kuan called me. He told me that the people of the Meizhou branch were carrying a coffin out of the door. It seemed that they were going to send a funeral. I felt strange. Yesterday, we held a memorial service. Today, we have to take the coffin out of the coffin. Isn't that a bit too hasty? According to the funeral rites of the Hakka, after holding the funeral in the mourning hall, monks and Taoists should be invited to chant sutras, burn money and do vegetarian rituals to expiate souls. It usually takes a few days before it is time to take the coffin out. Although feng shui masters don't need monks or Taoists to expiate souls, it is normal for the body to be kept for a few days to receive more worship. It is really inappropriate to take the coffin out in such a hurry. What's more, it is only 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. After pondering for a while, I got Wang Kuan to drive up to them first. Don't hang up the phone. Tell me the address at any time. I'll rush over here. When I met up with Wang Kuan, half an hour had passed. The funeral procession had left the city and was moving slowly on a quiet road in the suburbs. Since there weren't many people and carriages in the suburbs, we didn't dare to follow too closely. We stayed far behind them until they entered a cemetery. We didn't dare to follow them, so we had to stop outside. After stopping the car, I looked at the cemetery in front of me. I felt a little sad. As a feng shui master, he had spent his whole life searching for the dragon's acupoint. He had to prepare a few good places to protect his descendants after he died. It was a pity that Mr. Zhao had suffered a great calamity. After he died, he could only be buried in this cemetery. There were not many good graves with good feng shui. Moreover, in a good feng shui place, there were only 1 or 2 places that could be used as acupoints. In a cemetery where hundreds or even thousands of people were buried, the feng shui wouldn't be good. As a feng shui master, he couldn't find a good place to rest after he died. It was really sad. I guess the funeral procession wouldn't come out for a while. We had to wait outside in silence. As Wang Kuan had stayed up all night, he couldn't stand it anymore. I asked him to go to the back of the car to sleep. I sat there alone and waited. The Hakka people paid attention to funerals. When they were buried, there were many procedures. However, Mr. Zhao's funeral procession was simple. At noon, the procession that had entered the cemetery left. I hid there and observed for a long time. Since I wasn't familiar with the people in the Meizhou branch, I didn't find any valuable clues. Wang Kuan woke up around dusk. We went to get something to eat, then returned to the cemetery. Wang Kun drove the car to wait for me outside while I sneaked into the cemetery. Although there were graves everywhere, the newly deceased had a different aura. Soon, I found Mr. Zhao's grave. When I reached the gravestone, I used my Tao energy to isolate the surroundings. Then, I sat cross-legged and took out a talisman I had prepared last night. I wanted to use it to summon Mr. Zhao's soul. It was a plan I had come up with yesterday. No matter what the reason was, Mr. Zhao would know. Instead of blindly investigating, it was better to summon his soul and ask. A feng shui master's soul was much stronger than an ordinary person's. That was why it was much more difficult to summon his soul. Fortunately, Mr. Zhao was different. He hadn't comprehended the Tao energy to enter the Earth Master realm. He was just an ordinary feng shui master. Although his soul was stronger than an ordinary person's, it wasn't difficult for me to summon his soul. It was different from the time I had summoned Tong Tong's mother's soul. At that time, I hadn't comprehended the Tao energy yet. I could only use the blood of the deceased as a guide and the soul summoning spell. But now, I didn't need to do that. I just needed a talisman to summon his soul. After I guided the Tao energy in my hand, the soul summoning talisman glowed and turned into ashes, falling on Mr. Zhao's gravestone. At the same time, an ash-gray light diffused and seeped into the soil under the gravestone. Everything seemed to be going well. However, after a few minutes, I furrowed my brows. Mr. Zhao's soul hadn't appeared. The soul-summoning talisman had failed. How could it be? Mr. Zhao had just died, and his soul was still connected to his body. If I were to summon his soul in front of his grave, it should have been easy. I had never thought that something like this would happen. After thinking for a while, I understood something. No matter what, Mr. Zhao was a metaphysician. Although he didn't understand the Tao, the geomancy masters around him were all cultivators. I guess the enemy who had destroyed his family wasn't a good person. To hide something, the murderer had thought of the soul-summoning method. He had used some tricks to seal or scatter Mr. Zhao's soul. He had directly cut off the possibility of summoning his soul. After understanding this, I couldn't help but feel dispirited. I sat there and pondered for a while. Then, I cleaned the ashes of the talismans in front of the gravestone and left the public cemetery. I went with Wang Kun to the city to rest. The next morning, I went to the Meizhou branch again. Today, the place had returned to normal. There was no morning hall. Of course, I couldn't sneak in. So, I asked Wang Kun to pretend that I was here to find someone to check the geomancy. After asking around in the shops for a long time and spending a lot of money, I finally got the address of Mr. Zhao's former residence. Then, we followed the address. The branch in Meizhou was close to the outskirts of the city. It didn't take us long to find the address. It was a small villa in the outskirts of the city. Although it was a villa, the house in the courtyard was a traditional Hakka building. It was simple and unadorned. It looked more like a warm farmhouse. Since I didn't know the situation, I asked Wang Kun to stop the car far away. Then, I sneaked into the house alone. The courtyard's door wasn't locked and was only ajar. I frowned and didn't dare to directly push the door open. Instead, I hid my aura and climbed up the wall. After confirming that there was no one in the courtyard, I silently jumped down and walked towards the 3-story building. As soon as I reached the end of the corridor, I sensed that there were people in the room. There was also a fluctuation of Tao energy. There should be a feng shui master here. Based on the complexity of the auras, there was more than one person. Previously, the person from the branch in Meizhou had said that Mr. Zhao's family had been annihilated. Why was there a feng shui master in his former residence? I was even more careful. Following the fluctuation of Tao energy, I held my breath and focused until I reached an ajar door on the 2nd floor. I peeked through the crack of the door. There were a total of 4 people in the room. They were sitting cross-legged in a circle. All of them had their eyes closed. Their hands were folded in front of their abdomens. Looking at their appearances, it was clear that they were using their Tao energy to do something. As I got closer, I was able to clearly sense the ripples of their powers of the way. I was also able to determine their level of cultivation. 2 of them were about the same level as me, at the later stage of the sealing acupoint realm. As for the other 2, I could clearly sense that one of them was at the great circle of the sealing acupoint realm. The last person made me frown. I couldn't accurately sense this person's realm. However, based on the dense Tao energy fluctuations on his body, I could roughly determine that he was at the glory consciousness realm. With my cultivation realm, I would have been sensed by these people the moment I entered the courtyard. Fortunately, the dark green energy was concealing me. That was why I was able to make my way to the door. According to the rules and regulations of the Metaphysics Society, the branch would normally only have one person at the glory consciousness realm as the president. Furthermore, that person would be older when they reached the glory consciousness realm and would have almost no room for improvement. As for those with better talent who had reached the glory consciousness realm, they would almost all be transferred to the headquarters to take on the position of a director. On one hand, it would increase the headquarters' power. On the other hand, it would provide a better cultivation environment for these people. Under this kind of system, a mere Meizhou branch would have to send out all of their elites if they wanted to put together such a lineup. Perhaps these people weren't even from the Meizhou branch. Instead, they were local metaphysics families or sections. I didn't have the time to think about their background. I stuck my head out to take a look. I noticed that there seemed to be something in the center of the group of people. However, I couldn't see it clearly from my angle. Helpless, I could only hide at the door and silently wait. After around 20 minutes, an old man with his back facing me suddenly coughed painfully a few times. He even coughed out a mouthful of blood. After he calmed down, he stood up and said in a flustered and exasperated manner, "The highest realm of that Zhao Dingwu's lineage is only at the intermediate stage of glorious memory. Why is this restriction so powerful that we can't break it even with the combined strength of the 4 of us?" I didn't pay too much attention to his grumbling. As he stood up, the thing in the center of the group of 4 was finally revealed to me. I was extremely familiar with this item. I had personally used it several times. It was Zhang Wenfei's personal magic tool, the Yin Yang Yama Luo brush. Chapter 217. Without waiting for me to react, the other 3 people also stood up at the same time. The middle-aged man with the perfect acupoint pressing realm said, "Elder Lu, don't be impatient. That Zhao Wenshan's lineage met with a calamity a few decades ago, and is now lacking in talent. However, in the early years, he was the leader of our guest metaphysics world. No matter if it's spells or magic tools, he naturally has his own strengths. We can't break this restriction for now, but there's no need to be angry. Wait for President Zhang to deal with things over there and come back, then we'll think of something." President Zhang? Hearing this name, my heart froze. Previously in the morning hall, I heard that the filial son was President Zhang's youngest son, so I had some suspicions. Could it be that old man Zhao's death had something to do with President Zhang? I've heard Zhang Wenfei mention the Meizhou branch's president before. His name is Zhang Bingqing, and he seems to have some sort of relationship with Zhang Wenfei. However, I've never met him, so I don't have a clear impression of him. What made me even more uneasy was that although Zhang Wenfei and Old Man Zhao were from the Wenshan lineage, they were also members of the Metaphysics Society. If this was really done by Zhang Bingqing, then wouldn't it be internal strife in the metaphysics world? The Metaphysics Society had always had strict rules, and Zhang Canwen was a director of the headquarters, while Zhang Bingqing was just a small branch president. Where did he get the guts from? Also, from what the middle-aged man said, the glory of consciousness realm elder was clearly not Zhang Bingqing, but some Elder Lu. How could the Meijo branch have two people in the glory of consciousness realm? From the looks of it, there was probably an external power involved in this matter. At this moment, the glory of consciousness realm, Elder Lu, nodded and said, "Fine, we'll wait for President Zhang to come back before we deal with it. You three be careful, I'll meditate and heal my injuries." With that, he sat down cross-legged again. Before he closed his eyes, he said to the yin-yang yama brush that was wrapped in a halo of light, surnamed Zhao, "I advise you not to resist anymore. No matter how strong this restriction of yours is, it will be opened sooner or later. Now that you've opened it, I can still make the decision to send you into reincarnation. If you persist in going about things the wrong way, when we forcefully break the restriction in the future, it won't be that easy for your soul to dissipate." His words startled me. What kind of barrier is Mr. Zhao's soul hiding in? No wonder I failed to summon the soul. It wasn't the culprit who did something to it, but he fused his soul into the restriction to protect this magic tool. I frowned and pondered for a while. When I looked up, Old Man Lu had already closed his eyes to adjust his breathing. At this moment, among the four of them, two were at the 9 apertures acupuncture point realm, one was at the completed acupuncture point realm, and the last was at the glory of consciousness realm. The 3 people in the acupuncture point realm aren't much of a threat, I have the confidence to deal with them alone. Only the old man in the glory of consciousness realm is a problem. Although his pupils are strong, he has just reached the Ghost King realm after all. It isn't a problem to deal with ghosts, but against a feng shui master, I'm afraid he can only barely fight with the early stage of glory of consciousness. As for this old man surnamed Lu, I can't see through his strength. If he is at the middle stage of the glorious memory realm and I make a move rashly, I'm afraid I won't be able to gain any advantage. Fortunately, he was currently recuperating from his injuries, which gave me a chance. With the protection of the dark green energy, Tong Tong and I could ambush him. Even if Old Man Lu is at the middle stage of glory of consciousness, if we attacked him, we could hurt him or even kill him. I didn't like to take risks, but Mr. Zhao's soul was in the restriction. These people said that Zhang Bingqing would come back soon. At that time, I was afraid I wouldn't even have a chance to ambush him. Only by fighting with his life on the line might he be able to save old Master Zhao's soul, and the truth of what had happened would come to light. After making up my mind, I called Tong Tong and told her about my plan to ambush him. Tong Tong always listened to me. She didn't care if it was dangerous or not. It was the same this time. After I told her, she didn't say a word. She quietly urged the yin energy in her body, creating a dark ball of light in her hands. Then, she nodded and said to me, "Brother, I'm ready." I also took out the pure yang talisman I had prepared earlier. I used the dark green energy to isolate the surroundings. At the same time, I read the pure yang divine spell and made a pure yang hand seal. Soon, the pure yang karma flame condensed on my fingertip. Once everything was ready, aside from the old man surnamed Lu, the other 3 sat down cross-legged and began to recover their Dao Qi. It was the best chance to ambush him. I didn't have to worry anymore. I covered Tong Tong and my body with the dark green energy to ensure that no wisp of their aura leaked out. Then, I took Tong Tong and quietly sneaked into the room. Tong Tong and I didn't make a sound. With the dark green energy isolating our auras, the other 4 didn't react even when we arrived in front of Old Man Lu. The dark green energy was perfect at isolating Dao energy. However, cultivators had an instinctive reaction to danger. I didn't dare to move forward. I stopped and directly pressed the pure yang karma flame in my hands toward Old Man Lu's body. At the same time, I secretly told Tong Tong to take action. Tong Tong didn't slow down. The dark ball of light in her hands turned into a black talisman. Together with my pure yang karma flame, she pressed it toward Old Man Lu's forehead. Talisman techniques could only be used by cultivators. I had never heard of ghosts using such technique. Tong Tong had never used them before. However, judging from the aura of the black talisman, it was even denser than the heavenly Yin energy that Tong Tong had used to defeat the well ghost. It was likely that she had cultivated this technique after she had advanced to the Ghost King realm. The two of us attacked at the same time. Intense Tao energy and Yin energy fluctuated, causing a great commotion. Old Man Lu suddenly opened his eyes. However, before he could react, the pure Yang Karma flame and the black talisman reached him at the same time. He only had time to read half of the spell when a scarlet flame rose from his body. At the same time, a wisp of black energy reached him and enveloped half of his body. Old Man Lu immediately screamed. Half of his body was enveloped in the cold black energy, while the other half was enveloped in the scarlet flame. It looked extremely strange. The loud sound caused the other 3 people in the room to stand up. However, after successfully ambushing Old Man Lu, the other 3 were no longer a concern. I didn't rush to take action. Instead, I stood to the side with Tong Tong, on guard to prevent Old Man Lu from counterattacking in a desperate situation. However, it was obvious that I was overthinking. Regardless of whether it was the pure Yang Karma flame or the black talisman in Tong Tong's hands, they were extremely powerful. They were enough to cause fatal damage to someone in the glorious memory realm. Old Man Lu had no way of fighting back. He could only desperately resist the 2 Yin and Yang technique. The Tao energy on his body grew weaker and weaker. In the end, he closed his eyes and fainted. Truth be told, the old man surnamed Lu's reaction was already very fast in a situation where he was ambushed. Unfortunately, whether it was hand seals, talismans, or spells, they all required a process. Only when one reached the Celestial Master Realm and could use a one-word spell would they be able to do it instantly. Old Man Lu hadn't reached the Heavenly Master Realm, so the outcome was already decided. Of course, this didn't mean that Tong Tong and I could deal with any glorious memory realm feng shui master. This Old Man Lu was obviously below the 3-star realm. As long as he was above the 3-star realm, he would be able to block the pure Yang Karma flame and the black talisman. If he attacked Tong Tong and me, we would be the ones to lose. The situation wasn't clear yet, so I didn't kill him. After Old Man Lu fainted, I turned to attack the other 3. Seeing that Tong and I had successfully ambushed the old man surnamed Lu, the remaining 3 naturally knew that they were no match for us. Seeing that I was about to make a move, the 3 of them tacitly made the same choice, and that was to run. The 3 of them rushed towards the door. However, as they were all feng shui masters of the pressure point realm, their speed couldn't compare to mine, let alone my magic tool. I waved the heavenly fan in my hand, and the lonely grave map appeared, trapping the 3 of them within. Tong Tong also chased after them, and with a wave of the 2 black chains in his hands, he wrapped them around the 3's bodies and dragged them back. When the 3 of them returned to me, the Tao Qi in their bodies had already been completely sealed by Tong Tong. They fell to the ground in exhaustion, and all of them had expressions of defeat. In the end, it was the middle-aged man who had completed the pressure point realm who sat up and carefully said to me, "Taoist friend, why did you ambush us? Is there a misunderstanding?" I shook my head and chuckled, but didn't reply to his question. I only told Tong Tong to look after them. Then, I got up and walked to the yin-yang yama brush that was surrounded by a halo of light. I asked, "Is Old Man Zhao here? I am a good friend of Zhang Wenfei, and we met once before. I wonder if Old Man Zhao still remembers me?" After I asked this question, no sound came from the yin-yang yama brush. Instead, Old Man Zhao's urgent voice appeared in my mind. He said to me, "Little friend Zhou, it's not good to stay here for long. I will remove the restriction now. Quickly take the yin-yang yama brush and leave this place. I will tell you the details later." Old Man Zhao was obviously very clear about the current situation, and he urged me to leave as soon as he spoke. I originally wanted to interrogate the 4 people in the room, but since old man Zhao had said so, I could only give up. After the halo of the yin-yang Yama brush disappeared, I reached out and grabbed it. Then, I lifted my feet and was about to leave. However, after leaving, I was a little hesitant. Although I didn't know the specific details, the 4 people in the room had seen my appearance. With my reputation in the metaphysics world, as long as they wanted to, it would be easy for them to find out my identity. Since the day my parents died, I had become more and more careful. It was best to eliminate this kind of danger in the bud. In short, I would be most at ease if I killed the 4 of them. However, this was 4 lives after all, so I was still a little hesitant. At this moment, the 3 people who were still conscious clearly saw through my thoughts. It was the middle-aged man who had sealed his acupoints completely. He suddenly stood up from the ground and said to me in a threatening manner, "Fellow Taoist, do you know the background of this elder Lu that you ambushed? He is a member of the Lu family in the capital. I advise you to be smart and run away now. It's not too late. If you have any crooked thoughts, you should know the power of the Lu family in the capital, since you are also a person of the metaphysics world. When the time comes, you will have nowhere to hide." Hearing his words, I was stunned at first, and then my eyes quickly turned blood red. The Lu family in the capital, Lu Zhenyang. The scene from a few months ago instantly appeared in front of me. After a moment of silence, I took out the Pure Yang talisman and chanted the Pure Yang incantation. In an instant, the Pure Yang karma fire appeared on my fingertip. The middle-aged man seemed to realize that something was wrong. He wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I directly waved the Pure Yang karma fire. In the blink of an eye, the 3 people screamed and burned into a sea of fire. After dealing with the 3 of them, I turned my head and looked at the unconscious old man surnamed Lu lying on the ground. Chapter 218. After leaving with Elder Lu, I didn't dare to return to the hotel. Instead, I asked Wang Kuan to drive to the outskirts of the city. Finally, I found a secluded call and parked my car. I asked Wang Kuan to wait for me in the car while I carried the charred Elder Lu inside. The sneak attack from Tong Tong and I had made him faint and lose his ability to fight, but in fact, he had only used up his Dao Qi. The injuries on his body were not serious, and he had already recovered. Thus, when I threw him to the ground, he coughed lightly and woke up. "Who are you?" After waking up, Elder Lu's eyes were in a daze for a moment, but he quickly reacted to the situation. He sat on the ground and used his hands and feet to retreat. Unfortunately, he was in a cramped call, and after a few steps, his back was against the mountain wall. I didn't answer him and just sat in front of him. I lit a cigarette and asked, "Tell me, what's your name and position in the Lu family?" The man's face twitched, but he quickly hid the fear on his face. He put on a smile and hastily replied, "My name is Lu Zifeng. I'm the twin brother of Patriarch Lu Ziang. Taoist captured me here for no reason. Is there a misunderstanding?" This person was actually Lu Ziang's younger brother. Lu Ziang was Lu Zhenyang's grandfather and also the Lu family's patriarch. He was rumored to be the celestial master of the current dynasty. After saying that, Lu Zifeng seemed to gain some confidence. He slowly stood up and said, "If there really is a misunderstanding, our Lu family isn't unreasonable. Let's just talk about it. If this Taoist doesn't mind, let's be friends. If you need our Lu family's help in the future, just say the word." However, I just coldly looked at him and didn't answer his question. I simply described the black-clothed old man who had gone with Lu Zhenyang to my house. "Lu Zifeng, who that person is?" I asked Lu Zifeng, who he is. Lu Zifeng quickly told me that person was his 3rd brother, Lu Zining. At that time, I heard Lu Zhenyang call that person 3rd grandpa. It seemed that Lu Zifeng didn't lie to me. However, this made my heart even heavier. The Lu family's patriarch was a celestial master, and I already felt that revenge was hopeless. Now, it seemed that the Lu family's foundation was far beyond my imagination. Facing such a powerful Lu family, no matter how strong my will was, I couldn't help but waver. However, I quickly regained my resolve. As a son, if I couldn't even take revenge for my parents' blood, I would be a complete failure in life. No matter how powerful the Lu family was, I couldn't be the slightest bit afraid. Shaking my head, I pushed the distracting thoughts aside and asked Lu Zifeng, "Tell me, why did your Lu family attack Wen Shan's family? Did you kill Lord Zhao?" The smile on Lu Zifeng's face froze. He asked with some bewilderment, "Fellow Taoist, are you old friends with Wen Shan's lineage?" I coldly glanced at him. "Answer my question." Lu Zifeng's voice became hoarse. I only received a notice from the clan to bring people to Meizhou to help Zhang Bingqing. I didn't know what was going on before I came. Also, I wasn't the one who killed Zhao Dingwu. Is that so? The corner of my mouth raised into a mocking smile. Since Zhang Bingqing came to find the Lu family, it was clear that he couldn't deal with Wen Shan's branch alone. You came to help but didn't do anything. Do you believe that? Lu Zifeng hastily waved his hand at me and hastily said, "I didn't come alone. My third brother, Lu Xining's eldest son, Lu Qingping, came with me. He's at the 4-star knowledge realm and his strength far surpasses mine. He and Zhang Bingqing worked together to deal with Wen Shan's branch. I was only responsible for dealing with the aftermath." Lu Qingping? Lu Xining's eldest son? My heart jumped. A few months had passed and I thought that the chance to take revenge on the Lu family was still far away. I didn't think that the chance would come to me so quickly. Lu Zifeng was only the younger brother of Lu Xiang and Lu Xining. Killing him wouldn't have much of an impact on the Lu family, but if this Lu Qingping were to die, Lu Xining would lose his son in his old age. But according to what Lu Zifeng said, he was at the 4-star knowledge realm. It wouldn't be easy to kill him, so I had to think about it. Then, I carefully asked about the Lu family. Lu Zifeng most likely felt the killing intent in my words, so he didn't dare to hide anything and told me everything. According to what he said, in the generation of the Lu family's old man, Lu Xining and his 2 brothers were all at the Sky Master realm. Not only that, in the second generation, Lu Xiang's eldest son, Lu Qingyi, was also at the Sky Master realm. A family with 4 Sky Masters, what kind of power was that? Apart from that, in the second generation of the Lu family, there were many who were at the Glory of Knowledge realm. This power was terrifying. Even so, Zhang Wenfei had told me that the Lu family was one of the top metaphysical families that didn't have much foundation. From this, one could see how strong the metaphysical families that had been passed down for thousands of years were. When I got the title of Young Phoenix, I thought that Han Wennan and Zhang Kunlun weren't that talented, and that their future would be limited. But now, it seemed that in such a family, even if their talent wasn't as good as mine, their future achievements wouldn't be any worse than mine. After I asked all the questions, Lu Zifeng was no longer useful to me. The pure yang karmic fire surged from my fingertip and pressed on his head. Lu Zifeng's face was filled with shock, and he quickly got up to resist. However, he had used up all of his Dao Qi, and he had recovered less than 1/10 of it. He barely resisted for a few seconds before the Dao Qi in his body was used up again. The pure Yang Yi fire wrapped around his head, and it burned fiercely. He screamed tragically. I just stood there quietly. My eyes were extremely calm. Until Lu Zifeng's head was burned to ashes by the pure Yang karmic fire, I gently blew on it. The ashes floated down, and Lu Zifeng's body became a headless corpse. Next, I searched his body. In the end, this first-generation member of the Lu family, who was at the Glory of Knowledge realm, was really pitiful. He didn't have anything decent on him. After killing Liang Kaixiong, I was marked by his ghost mark. Later, I relied on luck to escape. At this moment, I was afraid that Lu Zifeng had something similar on him, so I didn't dare to stay for long. After searching, I immediately returned to the car and hurriedly left. When I returned to the hotel, I took out the yin-yang yama brush and wanted to ask Old Man Zhao what had happened. In the end, after communicating, Old Man Zhao asked me first. Little friend Zhou Yi, your methods just now were too cruel. Do you have enmity with the Lu family? Cruel? I smiled coldly and answered. Absolutely irreconcilable. Old Man Zhao seemed to be stunned, and didn't speak for a long time. Then, he sighed. Never mind, it's good that you don't get blinded by hatred. I had always respected Old Man Zhao, but when it came to the Lu family, anyone's advice was like the wind passing my ears. I definitely wouldn't take it to heart. After nodding, I changed the topic to Wen Shan's group. I hurriedly asked him what had happened. Lord Zhao was silent for a moment before he opened his mouth and said, It's a long story. Let's talk about it this time. You should have more or less understood it. It was that Zhang Bingqing who colluded with the Lu family and secretly imprisoned me. Then, he sent a message to Can Wen and Wen Fei. After they returned to Mei Province, Zhang Bingqing's true intentions were revealed. He worked together with the Lu family to kill the three of us. Hearing him say this, my heart tightened. I quickly interrupted and asked, What's the situation with Zhang Wenfei and his fellow disciple now? In terms of feelings, Zhang Wenfei and I were the closest. After seeing the yin-yang yama brush, my thoughts were always on him. At this time, Old Man Zhao was silent again. After a long time, his sorrowful voice came again. That day, Wenfei died in battle. Canwen ran out of energy. Then, to avoid the humiliation of the inherited magic tool, I used my remnant soul to open the yin-yang yama brush's restriction. I don't know what happened after that. Old Man Zhao had never married in his life. He had always treated Zhang Wenfei and his fellow disciple as his own. The grief of losing a son in his old age couldn't be described with words. Chapter 219. After talking about this, Mr. Zhao's voice didn't come back for a long time. I sat there in a daze. My mind kept replaying all the things that had happened since I met Zhang Wenfei. I couldn't say a word. After a long time, I clenched my teeth and spoke first. Grandpa, tell me what exactly happened. Master Zhao's voice was sorrowful as he continued to tell me about the tragedy that had happened in Mount Wen's branch. The Mount Wen branch worshipped the famous Wen Tianxiang. Many people knew that Wen Tianxiang was a patriotic poet, a famous general who fought against the Jin dynasty, and a leader of the literary and political circles at the end of the Southern Song dynasty. However, not many people knew that he was also a master of metaphysics. Wen Tianxiang's first name was Yun Sun, and his courtesy name was Song Rui. He called himself Mount Wen or Taoist Fuxiu. According to legend, Old Zhao's branch was inherited by Wen Tianxiang, a disciple of the Xianmen school. They took the name Mount Wen and got the name Mount Wen. After the fall of the Southern Song dynasty, they moved south and eventually settled in Meizhou. Since the Southern Song dynasty, the Mount Wen branch had been passed on for more than 1,000 years. Dozens of years ago, they were the leaders of the Xianmen school in Meizhou. Later on, when China's mainland was ravaged by the flames of war, Wen Shan's lineage inherited the will of their ancestors. Many of them died for the country. This caused their vitality to be greatly damaged and their orthodoxy to wither. They almost lost their inheritance. When the flames of war were extinguished, Wen Shan's lineage was only left with Master Zhao's lineage. Old Zhao's master was called Zhang Wenyuan, and he was known as Daoist Xuemei in the Xianmen school. Since he was from Meizhou, he had a withered wintersweet branch. During the war-torn era, not only did he fight against Japanese warlocks, but he also violated the rules of the Xianmen school by attacking ordinary Japanese soldiers. Wherever he went, snowflakes bloomed like wintersweet. That was how he got his name. Old Zhao was Daoist Xuemei's eldest disciple. Besides Old Zhao, Daoist Shimei Zhang Wenyuan had two sons. The eldest was called Zhang Bingxian, and the youngest was Zhang Bingxian. He was the current president of the Xianmen school branch in Meizhou. As fellow disciples of the same sect, one of the reasons Zhang Bingxian had tried to kill Lord Zhao was because of Daoist Shimei's eldest son, Zhang Bingxian. As mentioned earlier, after the chaotic era ended, Zhang Wenyuan was the only remaining branch of the Wenshan lineage. He inherited almost all of the Wenshan lineage's inheritance, including precious techniques and magic tools. During the war, Shimei Daoist, Zhang Wenyuan, had survived. However, her body had been seriously injured, and she could no longer make any progress in her cultivation. Therefore, she had stayed at home, taking care of her three disciples. With the support of the precious cultivation techniques and magical tools of Wenshan's lineage, Zhao Dingwu and the Zhang brothers had grown rapidly. Soon, they had become the dazzling stars of the southern metaphysics world. Among them, the one who showed the greatest talent was the ordinary geomancy master, Zhao Dingwu, who was not even a geomaster. Back then, there was no existence of the Metaphysics Association. Therefore, there were no records of the opening of acupoints during the baptism of Dragon Qi. However, according to Zhao Dingwu, he had been close to Yi Pianpian, a quasi-3 meridians talent. Zhang Bingxian's talent was not bad either, a quasi-2 meridians talent. In fact, because Zhang Bingxian had inherited Wenshan lineage's magical tool, the Yin-Yang Yama brush, he was even stronger than Zhao Dingwu. The two of them were known as the twin heroes of Wenshan, and were very famous in the metaphysics world. Zhang Bingxian had been young at the time, and had not been on the same level as the two of them. As for Zhao Dingwu and Zhang Bingxian, as fellow disciples of the same sect, they had a very good relationship. They had always been inseparable, cultivating together and improving rapidly. By the time they were 30, they had both entered the glory of knowledge realm. Just as the hope of the Wenshan lineage's revival was about to appear on the two of them had encountered a mysterious force during one of their travels. The other party had over 10 glory of knowledge realm geomancers, surrounding and killing the two of them. In an extremely dangerous situation, the two of them fought to the very last moment. At the very last moment, Zhang Bingxian had used his life as the price to activate a forbidden technique of the Wenshan lineage, killing several glory of knowledge earth geomancers. The others had all been heavily injured. After this, Zhao Dingwu had escaped back to Meizhou with Zhang Bingxian's belongings, saving his life. However, because his body had been too heavily injured, Zhao Dingwu had been unconscious for a month after escaping. When he woke up, the meridians in his body were blocked, his cultivation foundation completely destroyed. Daoist Shimei Zhang Wenyuan was already very old. In addition, she had been seriously injured several times during the chaotic years of war, and had a hidden illness. When she heard that her most promising apprentice and son had been killed and her Dao foundation destroyed, her hidden illness flared up and she passed away. The Wenshan lineage that had just seen the hope of revival immediately fell from its limitless glory, and was now in its most critical moment. Fortunately, the Wenshan lineage's historical reputation, and their generosity in dying for the country during the chaotic times of war, had a great influence in the southern metaphysical world. Even in such a state, their prestige in the metaphysical world was still very high. After such a tribulation, the Wenshan lineage still managed to pull through with the support of various parties in the metaphysical world. At this time, coincidentally, the Metaphysics Association was preparing to be established. Everyone in the Meizhou region elected Zhao Dingwu, who had his foundation destroyed and was already known as a cultivation cripple, as the first president, to show their respect for the Wenshan lineage. However, Zhao Dingwu rejected this proposal. Instead, he pushed forward his junior brother Zhang Bingqing, who had just reached the age of 20. He pleaded with the entire southern metaphysical world to take care of Zhang Bingqing, so that they could use him to once again revive the Wenshan lineage. Zhao Dingwu's attitude was firm, so the southern metaphysical world had no choice but to accept his proposal. Many metaphysical sects had the intention to nurture Zhang Bingqing, and the Metaphysics Association had also listed Zhang Bingqing as a candidate for the future president. After confirming this matter, Zhao Dingwu calmly stayed in the Meizhou Metaphysics Association as an ordinary member. While he was studying geomancy, he took Zhang Bingqian's two youngest sons as his disciples and taught them carefully every day. These two disciples were Zhang Canwen and Zhang Wenfei. I was startled when I heard this. Zhang Canwen and Zhang Wenfei were blood-related brothers. Moreover, Zhang Bingqing was their uncle. They belonged to the Wenshan lineage, and they were their own flesh and blood. How did they end up in such a situation where they had to fight each other? I was puzzled. Old man Zhao continued to narrate. Back then, he had wanted to hand over all the inheritance of the Wenshan lineage to Zhang Bingqing, but it was a pity that Zhang Bingqian's talent was far inferior to his and Zhang Bingqian's. Even though he had a famous teacher to nurture him from a young age, it was only when he was in his 20s that he barely entered the pressure point realm. Moreover, when he received the baptism of the Dragon Qi, he had only opened 6 meridians in his body, which could barely be considered as a 1-meridian talent. Under such circumstances, Zhang Bingqing was obviously unable to shoulder the heavy responsibility of reviving the Wenshan lineage. Thus, Zhao Dingwu changed his mind and handed over the inheritance and magic tools to Zhang Canwen and Zhang Wenfei, placing his hopes on the two of them. On the other hand, he didn't give up on Zhang Bingqing, and relied on his prestige in the southern metaphysical world to send Zhang Bingqing to the glory of knowledge realm, and successfully become the president of the Meizhou branch. From then on, Zhang Canwen and Zhang Wenfei both displayed extraordinary talent. Everything seemed to be developing in a good direction, but it was a pity that Zhang Bingqing was extremely dissatisfied with all of this. In the beginning, he was only dissatisfied with Zhao Dingwu handing over the inheritance and magic tools of the Wenshan lineage to Zhang Canwen and Zhang Wenfei. Later on, he even questioned Zhao Dingwu to his face, saying that his brother Zhang Bingqian's death had been a trap set up by Zhao Dingwu. The reason was that Zhao Dingwu's talent had been stronger back then, but Zhang Wenyuan had cared about kinship and hadn't handed over the inheritance of the Wenshan lineage to him, causing him to feel indignant and have evil thoughts. In these past few years, Zhang Bingqing had even expressed this view on many public occasions, completely falling out with Zhao Dingwu, and even publicly withdrawing from the Wenshan lineage. Even under such circumstances, Zhao Dingwu had never thought that Zhang Bingqing would actually act against him and his two nephews. Furthermore, in recent years, Zhang Canwen's strength had already reached the glory of knowledge realm, surpassing Zhang Bingqing. Under his intimidation, even if Zhang Bingqing had any evil thoughts, he didn't dare to act rashly. However, he hadn't thought that Zhang Bingqing would actually collude with the Lu family, ultimately disregarding kinship and acting against them. When Zhang Canwen and Zhang Wenfei had been participating in the exchange competition in Shenzhen, the Lu family had sent out Lu Zifeng and Lu Qingping, two glory of knowledge realm martial artists. After meeting up with Zhang Bingqing, they had directly imprisoned Zhao Dingwu and laid down a trap, notifying Zhang Canwen and Zhang Wenfei that Zhao Dingwu was critically ill and for them to quickly return. When they had hurriedly returned to Mei Province, they had fallen head first into the trap that Zhang Bingqing had meticulously laid down. After a bitter battle, Zhang Wenfei had died in battle, and Zhang Canwen had fled with heavy injuries. Even the inherited magic tool, the yin-yang yama brush, had not been able to take it with him. In this sort of situation, Zhao Dingwu had used the secret inheritance technique of the Wenshan lineage, using the price of his soul not being able to reincarnate for 10,000 years to lay down a seal around the yin-yang yama brush in an attempt to prevent the inherited magic tool from falling into Zhang Bingqing's hands. However, as time passed, the seal would dissipate one day. Of the Zhang Canwen brothers, one was dead and the other was heavily injured. There simply wasn't any hope of rescue. However, he hadn't thought that in this sort of situation I would appear. After listening to Grandpa Zhao's long story, my heart became gloomy. There would always be evil people in the world. Perhaps it was innate, but anything could become a catalyst for them to do evil, like Lu Zhenyang, like Zhang Bingqing. Speaking of which, Zhang Bingqing was far worse than Lu Zhenyang. Because of his own jealousy and greed, he had ignored kindness and familial love. He had killed Zhao Dingwu, who had helped him grow and become successful, and he had killed his own nephew. It was hard to imagine what sort of beast's heart was hidden beneath the human skin he wore. And from Zhang Bingqing's perspective, perhaps from the moment his father and brother died, a seed of hatred had been planted in his heart. Chapter 220. At the peak of his life, his master and junior brother, who were like his closest kin, both died. His cultivation and Tao foundation were destroyed. Old Man Zhao's experience was very similar to mine from a few months ago. However, he was even more unfortunate than me. He didn't have the saliva of the true dragon, so he was unable to recover his talent and cultivation for the rest of his life. Not only that, from then on, he had to bear the heavy pressure of the entire Wenshan lineage with the identity of an ordinary feng shui master. After 20 years of hardship, he finally saw the light of hope, but he suffered the heaviest betrayal. This time, the price he paid was his own life. However, even if he died, he couldn't just leave. He had to use the last of his soul to protect the inheritance of the Wenshan lineage. Old Man Zhao's life was very difficult and heavy. Just like he said, if it wasn't for Zhang Bingqing's hatred that clouded his mind, he wouldn't have suffered such a heavy price. That's why he sighed to me. However, it was a pity that I didn't agree with his words. I was different from Zhang Bingqing. He first lost his mind and then developed hatred. I, on the other hand, had no choice but to bear the hatred. To me, if I could get revenge, then so what if I lost my mind? After listening to the story, I was silent for a long time. In the end, I could only let out a long sigh. With a gloomy expression, I asked Old Man Zhao, "How long can this restriction last?" He used a secret technique to activate this restriction with the power of his own soul. Although I don't know the principles behind it, I have a general idea that the day the restriction dissipates is the day his soul dissipates. Old Man Zhao's voice wasn't too heavy. He just said with a bit of disappointment, originally, it could last for a few more days, but now there's only about 10 days left. 10 days. I thought about it and said, I have enmity with the Lu family, and I'm also close friends with Wen Fei. In 10 days, I'll get rid of Zhang Bingqing and the people from the Lu family one by one. I'll get revenge for Wen Fei and myself. Facing Old Man Zhao, who had experienced many hardships in his life, I wanted to do something for him before I left. However, 10 days was too short. I couldn't bring Zhang Wenfei back from the dead, nor could I find the heavily injured Zhang Canwen. Perhaps the only thing I could do in time was to get revenge. Who would have thought that after Lord Zhao heard what I said, his voice became hurried, and he hastily said, "You're only in the pressure point realm. Even if you successfully ambushed Lu Zifeng with your ghost with the power of a ghost king, you won't have any chance against Lu Qingping, who's in the glorious knowledge realm." Although old Master Zhao was just an ordinary feng shui master, he still had the eyesight. What he said was not nonsense. I grinned. I have to try to know. At the very least, I have absolute confidence in dealing with Zhang Bingqing. Even if I can't defeat Lu Qingping, I have absolute confidence in escaping. It won't be too dangerous. Old Man Zhao was silent for a moment, but in the end, he shook his head and said to me solemnly, "Little friend Zhou, I'm already a dead man. My soul can't exist for too long, so I don't have time to get revenge. If you really want to help me, you might as well help me find Canwen." That day I escaped in a hurry. I have something to tell him. Also, this inherited magic tool can't be passed down in our generation. Because of his insistence, I could only agree to help him find Zhang Canwen's tracks for the next few days and temporarily ignore the matter of revenge. Through the sensing of Tao energy, as long as Zhang Canwen appeared within 10 meters of me, I would be able to detect him. However, Zhang Canwen was on the run, so he would definitely hide his tracks. Moreover, compared to the sensing range of 10 meters, the entire Meizhou or even the entire Guangdong was too big. It was almost impossible to find Zhang Canwen by relying on my own power. Thus, after thinking for a while, I called Wang Yongjun and asked him if he had enough people in Meizhou to help me with this matter. Wang Yongjun was as straightforward as ever. He immediately told me that he didn't have any property or people here, but he had many business partners. If I gave him one day, he would be able to find enough people to help me with this matter. I nodded and thanked him, then hung up the phone. After asking in detail the location and direction that Zhang Canwen had escaped to on the day of the accident, I went out and rushed to the scene. After carefully investigating, I slowly searched in the direction that Zhang Canwen had escaped in. It was impossible that Zhang Bingqing and the people of the Liu family hadn't searched this route. They hadn't found anything on that day, let alone after so many days. After spending the entire afternoon, I didn't find any valuable clues. The next morning, just as I was about to set off to search again, I received a call from Xie Qinghua. He told me that he had met up with Lu Chuanda in Shenzhen. He asked me where I was. After listening to him, I realized that the 1 week that I had promised Xie Qinghua and Lu Chuanda was already up. I thought for a while, then told them to rush to Meizhou. These two were former guild leaders, and their power had reached the glory of consciousness realm. If they rushed over now, they should be able to help with the search for Zhang Canwen. More importantly, if something happened with the two of them around, my power would increase a lot. Because of the restrictions that Tong had placed in their bodies, the two of them were even more enthusiastic and flattering than before. After the agreement, they only used one morning to rush over. In the next few days, they all participated in the search. With their participation, and the people that Wang Yongjun had arranged to work together, it seemed that the hope of finding Zhang Canwen was much higher. However, it was a pity that 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Even when the 10 days were up and the restrictions on the Yin-Yang Yama brush had dimmed to the extreme, we still hadn't found Zhang Canwen. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. On the last day, I didn't take Grandpa Zhao out, but silently stayed with him. We sat in the hotel room and prepared to send him off on his last journey. Due to the dissipation of the restriction, Zhao Dingwu's voice could barely be heard. However, he still sat there, muttering something to himself. His expression was one of confusion, one of anger, and one of relief. Looking at him, I felt even more sad. Finding Zhang Canwen was the old man's last wish. It was a pity that I hadn't been able to help him with such a small matter. People had the last radiance of the setting sun, and so did ghosts. At noon that day, when the restrictions on the Yin-Yang Yama brush were so faint that they couldn't be seen, Grandpa Zhao's soul suddenly jumped out of the Yin-Yang Yama brush. It looked as if his soul had solidified, no longer as illusory as before. He sighed and then told me, "You should know that I'm looking for Zhang Canwen for the inheritance of Wenshan's lineage. After this incident, he's the only one left of Wenshan's lineage. Unfortunately, my lineage has suffered a setback. I'm afraid that our lineage will really be cut off now. Fine, I'll do my best and leave it to fate. Little friend Joey, after I leave, keep this Yin-Yang Yama brush. You can use it for yourself or collect it. Also, I will tell you where the true inheritance of Mount One is. If you want, you can go find it yourself. I only ask one thing. After I leave, do your best to find Canwen. If you can find him, do your best to help him maintain the inheritance of Mount One." After saying that, Grandpa Zhao felt that he didn't have time. He didn't even wait for my reply and directly said to me, "After you enter the glory of consciousness realm, guide your Tao energy into this yin-yang yama brush and carefully comprehend it. You will find that there are other mysteries. You will have to figure out the details yourself. I can only tell you that this is a secret that my Mount One has guarded for 1,000 years. It is also a responsibility that my Mount One has carried for 1,000 years. In the future, when you see that item, you will understand the reason." As he spoke, the dense halo of light around the yin-yang yama brush completely disappeared. Old Master Zhao's figure also gradually faded until he became transparent and disappeared in the air. After he completely disappeared, I faintly heard Grandpa Zhao's final murmur. Chapter 221. Heaven and earth have righteous energy, giving form to chaos. Below are rivers and mountains, and above are the sun and stars. People call it righteous, filling the sky. The road to the throne is clear, containing peace and spitting out the Ming court. At the end of time, I see it, one by one, in painting. After old Zhao's figure disappeared, I followed his last murmur and read the full text of Wen Tianxiang's Song of Righteousness. In the entire history of Huaxia, Wen Tianxiang was the only one who single-handedly supported the entire nation. As for old Zhao, he was the descendant of Wen Shan, who had inherited Wen Tianxiang's metaphysics. Although he hadn't experienced the changes of time, he had been loyal all his life. He was worthy of being the descendant of Wen Gong. Not only had he inherited Wen Tianxiang's metaphysics, but he had also inherited Wen Tianxiang's righteous energy. Standing in the narrow room of the hotel, I bowed deeply to the dimming yin-yang yama brush. When I lifted my head, my eyes were cold. Since ancient times, heroes didn't have a hard time dealing with beauties, but with villains. Old Zhao had worked hard his whole life. He had gone through many trials and tribulations. All he wanted was to maintain the inheritance of Wen Shan. According to him, when Wen Shan's branch was hit hard, the entire southern metaphysics world had lent a helping hand. They had helped Wen Shan get through the crisis. However, no one had expected that Wen Shan's branch would be destroyed by Zhang Bingqing, one of their own. Although Zhang Canwen had escaped, where could a heavily injured and dying person escape to? After more than 10 days of searching, perhaps old Zhao still had hope when he left. However, I knew how cruel reality was. Zhang Canwen had most likely met with misfortune. I sighed and held the yin-yang yama brush in my hand. I recalled what old Zhao had said before he left. He had said that he would give me the yin-yang yama brush. However, it was the inheritance of Wen Shan's branch. How could I dare to take it for myself? After thinking for a while, I called Xie Qinghua, Lu Chuanda, and Wang Kuan over. I arranged for them to continue searching for Zhang Canwen in Meizhou and the surrounding areas. It would be best if we could find Zhang Canwen's whereabouts. I will return the yin-yang yama brush to him and do my best to help him rebuild the Mount One lineage. If I really can't find Zhang Canwen, I'm not a pedantic person. I'll take the yin-yang yama brush for my own use, but at the same time, I'll also promise Lord Zhao and his 2 disciples that I'll kill Zhang Canwen to comfort their souls in heaven. Zhang Bingqing is only a quasi-meridian talent, and his strength is only in the early stages of glory of consciousness. His strength is not much different from Chairman Su, Xie Qinghua, and the others, and they are all at the weakest level of glory of consciousness. Even without Tong Tong and Xie Qinghua's help, I alone have the strength to fight him. It was better to take revenge as soon as possible. Moreover, the Lu family was here as well. Although I don't have the strength to go to Beijing to find Lu Zhenyang and challenge the entire Lu family, since they came to Guangdong, they can't blame me for collecting some interest. As I arranged for everyone to continue searching for Zhang Canwen, I went alone to the Meizhou branch. I quietly waited at the entrance for an entire day. In the evening, I saw a person in the middle stage of the pressure point realm come out from inside, so I quietly followed him. When I arrived at a secluded place, I casually used a binding talisman to restrain him and brought him back to the hotel I was staying at. A person in the middle stage of the pressure point realm was enough to hold the position of a director or vice chairman in any of the metaphysics branches. After a series of interrogation, this person very quickly revealed Jean Canouin's residence address and his whereabouts over the past few days. According to what he said, Jean Canouin rarely appeared at the Meizhou branch. It was only 10 days ago that he and Lu Qingping came to the branch and gathered all the members of the Meizhou branch to investigate the relationship between Zhao Dingwu, Jean Canouin, and the others. After the Lu family killed the Mount Wen lineage, they didn't hide their tracks. Most of the people in the Meizhou branch knew of Lu Qingping and the others. Calculating the time, his investigation was most likely triggered by me killing Lu Zifeng and rescuing Lord Zhao. I didn't know if his investigation would lead to me or not, but it didn't matter. The Lu family and I were mortal enemies. It didn't make a difference whether or not it was one more thing. Apart from this, Jean Canouin appeared again yesterday. This time, he was alone. After arriving at the Meizhou branch, he gathered over 10 people in the pressure point realm and set up a spirit summoning array in the Meizhou branch. The spirit summoning array was originally very simple. Even when I hadn't reached the Earth Master realm, I could still rely on some metaphysics tools. With Jean Canouin's cultivation, he only needed a talisman to summon a soul. The reason why he set up the spirit summoning array was because he wanted to summon Jean Canouin's soul. The spirit summoning technique was the same as the soul-searching hand seal. The caster could only use it on people whose cultivation was lower than their own. If it was used on people with similar or higher cultivation, they wouldn't be able to use it. Of course, metaphysics had its own ways to adapt. The spirit summoning array was a method to gather everyone's power to summon the soul of a powerful person. Jean Canouin was at the middle stage of the glorious memory realm. On Jean Canouin's side, Lu Qingping, who was the strongest, was also at the same realm. It was impossible to use the spirit summoning array on him. Under such circumstances, the only way to summon a soul was to set up the spirit summoning array. Speaking of which, I was lucky. The person I had randomly kidnapped was one of the feng shui masters who had set up the spirit summoning array yesterday. That was why he knew so much inside information. However, after knowing this news, my heart sank. Under most circumstances, the soul would only leave the body when it was about to die. The spirit summoning technique was only effective on dead people. Since Jean Canouin wanted to summon Jean Canouin's soul, did that mean that Jean Canouin was already dead? Before I could figure it out, the person told me that the spirit summoning array had been set up for an entire day, but in the end, it failed. It didn't summon Jean Canouin's soul at all. After listening to him, I understood that Jean Canouin had set up the spirit summoning array. Although it was called the spirit summoning array, it was actually to confirm whether Jean Canouin was still alive or not. If he couldn't summon his soul, there were only two possibilities. Either Jean Canouin's soul was imprisoned somewhere after his death, or Jean Canouin wasn't dead yet. Moreover, considering the fact that Jean Canouin had escaped from their ambush, it was more likely that he was still alive. After understanding this, I felt much better. As long as he was still alive, everything was fine. At first, I just wanted to get Jean Canouin's address so that I could secretly attack him. I didn't expect to get a surprise. After restraining the person again, I sat on a nearby chair and frowned, contemplating. If Jean Canouin wasn't dead, should I put aside the matter of taking revenge and try my best to find Jean Canouin before Jean Canouin? After thinking about it for a while, I shook my head. Searching for people was too random. Even if I tried my best to find them, it was hard to say what the result would be. In order to ensure Jean Canouin's safety, I should make a move on Zhang Bingqing as soon as possible. As long as I killed Jean Canouin, it didn't matter if I could find Jean Canouin or not, he would be much safer. If Jean Canouin died, Lu Qingping would be the only outsider left. No matter what, he wouldn't be able to continue searching for Zhang Canwen. However, there was a disadvantage to doing so, which was that it would easily alert the enemy. After Zhang Canwen died, Lu Qingping might feel that he couldn't do anything and leave Meizhou. If that was the case, I could only put aside the matter of taking revenge on the Lu family. After careful consideration, I decided that it was more important to ensure Zhang Canwen's safety. There was no rush to take revenge on the Lu family. Furthermore, Lu Qingping was in the middle stage of glorious memory, and was also a prodigy of the Lu family. He might have some life-saving items on him. In a situation where I wasn't fully prepared, it would be too difficult to kill him. After confirming it, I rested for a bit before heading to Zhang Canwen's house. Although Lu Qingping was with Zhang Canwen, it was unlikely that he would stay at Zhang Canwen's house. Thus, to kill Zhang Canwen, it would be the best time when he was sleeping at home. When I set off, the sky was already dark. When I reached Zhang Canwen's house, it was in the dead of night. Zhang Canwen also lived in a small courtyard, but it was different from Zhao Dingwu's house. This was a proper villa district. There were rows of 3-story villas that looked pleasing to the eye. According to that person's confession, Zhang Canwen's house was in the middle of villa number 6. I hid in the shadows by the wall and sneakily made my way to the fence of villa number 6. With a nimble flip, I jumped into the courtyard. Then, I used the dark green power to hide my presence. I snuck to the base of the wall, closed my eyes, and sensed carefully. Very quickly, I felt an extremely strong Tao energy wave from the second floor of the villa. From the aura, it looked like the early stage of glorious memory. It was most likely Zhang Canwen. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.